And we're live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Warrant Committee. Madam Clerk, would you please take our attendance?
Yeah. We have Dave Humphreys, Tom Caldwell, Lori Connolly, Jane Huntling, Allison Gagnon, Julie Joyce on Zoom, Kristen Kosiel on Zoom, Ken Lyons, Julia Maxwell on Zoom, JJ O'Connor on Zoom, Ronald Sia on Zoom, and Judy Steele on Zoom.
Thank you. Tonight we have two agenda items. One's going to be a presentation by a town administrator with regards to our FY25 budget, and then next is going to be a presentation from the Department of Schools with regards to their budget. Before we do that, there's one matter that I want to address briefly. It's in order with regards to discussions of the budget, specifically with regards to the school budget. I've been made aware of filing of a disclosure of non-elected municipal employee financial interest conflict of interest form by Kristen Kosiel, a member of our warrant committee, okay, disclosing that she has a family member who is a employee of the school department. And so what she's done is she's disclosed to us pursuant to Chapter 268A, Section 19, as is required of that interest. And what she's done is there's a form that she fills out. She discloses the public this conflict of interest. And then in her case, because she's an appointed person, such as we are, by the town moderator, the town moderator then reviews it and then makes a determination. And in this particular case, the town moderator has determined that her engaging in these discussions and votes at our warrant committee would bear with me, is not so substantial as to be deemed likely to affect the integrity of the services which the municipality may expect from her, okay? So the town moderator, who is the appointing authority, has reviewed this and found that the interest is not so substantial as to be deemed likely to affect the integrity of the services, okay? Her ability to process this. And I've discussed this with her, with Kristen, and she believes that she can be fair and impartial in her role here on the warrant committee in discussing these things. But we need to disclose this and air it to the public, because we hopefully have the public trust. They need to know that we are deciding things in the town's interest and not our own personal interest. Kristen, are you there?
Yep.
Did you hear what we just talked about with regards to your conflict of interest form?
I did, yes, and I agree that I can be fair and impartial when discussing this and voting.
So have you decided how you wish to proceed? Are you going to recuse yourself? Are you going to engage in the discussions? Have you decided, how you would like to proceed?
I mean, I'll participate in the discussion.
Okay, thank you. I think that's good. I think, we've had Kristen on the committee for several years now. She's always very engaging, insightful questions. I personally, in my mind, have zero question as to Kristen's ability to be fair and impartial and to give her best interest, holding her best effort, keeping first and foremost the interests of the town and the public at large. And so thank you, Kristen, for bringing this to our attention. And then what we will do is we will refer to this anytime that we go into that discussion, because it's important that the public be made so aware of this so that we can hopefully continue to earn and keep the trust. Okay. But that's out of the way. Mr. Milano, would you like to share with us your thoughts on the FY25 budget?
Sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry. I will, the committee's okay to that, I will do a presentation on budget status. This will be very closely similar to the presentation I provided to the Select Board a couple of weeks ago. So I'll just kind of go over the budget in terms of general big picture items, and I'll be happy to take any questions that members may have. Okay, so just in terms of the big picture, the fiscal 25 budget, as approved by the Select Board last night, as recommended by myself, is a level service budget that seeks to maintain existing services. I will note, as I'm sure there's been discussion and will be discussion at this board, that there was a number of needs-based requests received both from town departments as well as from the school department, but those are not being included in the budget recommendation as it currently stands.
I'm sorry. And what was the total of those requests,
Of the additional.
the needs-based?
So in terms of the school department, that was $1,075,000 above their level service. And then on the town side, the total number of requests was closer to 1.8 million, but we did not triage that down and kind of present a recommended list. So that's just kind of all the requests tabulated.
Wish list.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then in terms of one other item that is why we're in decent shape with this budget is that the Milton retirement system hit full funding or will hit full funding in this fiscal year. So how that has worked in the past is that we've been making payments to the retirement system to achieve full funding. So significant amount of money over and above kind of the normal cost to pay for expected current employee benefits was going into the retirement system to reach a point at what it could fully fund expected benefits. The targeted date that our last funding schedule had for full funding was fiscal 26. So this moved that 2 years earlier, thanks to just general growth on the market and the town continuing to make those contributions. Actually, it was Jay who came to us, I think last summer, who said, hey, I think you're going to hit full funding before you expect to. And we said, yeah, whatever, Jay. And I'm just kidding. No, we took a time to think about it, look at some of the stuff, start thinking about what would happen if that were the case. And he was right, and we hit full funding. So we're one of a few handful of cities and towns and retirement systems in Massachusetts that are at that point. It's something that the town should be very happy about. It means we're starting to think about our other long-term liabilities, which are referred to as OPEB, other post-employment benefits. It's primarily health care for retirees. It's a big liability that we have. We continue to pay for retiree health insurance. So we're starting now to make payments into an OPEB trust at a much higher number to start paying down those long-term liabilities. And also just add, the Milton Retirement Board sets its funding schedule, and they included in the funding schedule $1 million over and above the amount that was required to meet the normal cost, which is essentially the retirement system building up its own reserves. So if there is an economic downturn, all of a sudden the retirement system won't go from fully funded to underfunded. So they're seeking their own reserves in a sense. The state actuary that works with the retirement system had recommended much more aggressive funding over and above full funding. And we've worked with the retirement board to get to a number we think is a little bit more appropriate to continue to build up those reserves, but not continue to take taxpayer funds into a fully funded retirement system.
What was our annual contribution to that?
It's over $8 million, I'd say, over
That we would make
the last
annually?
few years. Previously? Yeah, previously in about $8 million. Yeah. And there are approximately $2.5 million in savings accruing to the operating budget by hitting full funding and by putting some of that money into the long-term liabilities, but not all of it.
And when you say the long-term liabilities, the OPEB?
Correct.
But does that mean we're only putting in 1.5 million out of the 8? So what are we doing with the 8, I guess?
So just to, not to talk about explicit numbers, so let's say if it was supposed to be a $9 million contribution. Now that we hit full funding, now it's a $4 million contribution. So we have savings of 5.
Okay.
So roughly 2.5 continues to go into long-term liabilities, both the retirement system and OPEB. $2.5 million is now flowing to the operating budget to be used on expenses.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So that's kind of the big picture on the expenditure side. On the revenue side, we've assumed revenue growth kind of typical to what our recent history has been, and I'll go through our revenue assumptions in more detail moving forward. So what revenues do we have? Property taxes, as everybody knows, those are allowed. The levy of the property tax is about to go up by 2.5% a year without an override. Local receipts are all our other revenues, from motor vehicle excise tax being the main one there. Income earned on our money stored at financial institutions. Other local receipts such as our trash sticker revenue, building permit fees, and other fees that city departments charge. Indirect costs from enterprise funds. So the enterprise funds, which have employees, their benefits are funded in the operating budget, the general fund, and then we charge those, the water enterprise fund, the sewer enterprise fund, and the stormwater for percentages of what their costs would be. State aid is money received from the state, the main one being Chapter 70 education aid, and then there's a number of other categories. The other big one would be unrestricted general government aid, the acronym of UGA, if you've seen that before. And then on the flip side, the state does charge the cities and towns assessments. And lastly, just available funds that are transfers that are in and out of funds that we have available to us. This is a little bit of history on local receipts. As you can tell, we do try to budget conservatively. Our actuals have been outpacing our budget. That is what we want it to do. We don't necessarily want it to be too far, but we do want to build in some conservative nature to that. As you can see here, cities and towns across Massachusetts after COVID really ratcheted back their local receipts forecasts. At the time, folks thought there would be a lot more impacts to local receipts than expected, but as I'm sure everybody here is aware, the auto market went crazy, motor vehicle excise taxes were strong. People started doing renovations to their homes. Our collections for building permit fees were strong. So we've returned back to where we're not incorporating any kind of like concerns about local receipts into our forecast. And the other big change that happened in fiscal '23 was interest income. If you try to buy a house or buy a car, you know interest rates are crazy right now. It hurts when you go to buy things. It helps us when we store our money. And we have done very well in interest income. That has continued this year. From fiscal '22 to fiscal '23, you're talking about almost $750,000 change in growth. We can be somewhat optimistic that will continue through '25, but it starts to get hard to kind of forecast where those interest rate markets will be as rates are higher now than they've been for some time. And they've stayed higher than I think folks were expecting.
And what are we forecasting for '24? 9.5?
For all the local receipts, it's just almost close to 10 million. 9.9 million is our current forecast. And then for interest income explicitly, it's $500,000 right now.
The 9.5 for fiscal '24?
Is this year, correct.
And what are we trending?
We're trending well. Interest income is continues to be very strong.
So do you think we'll hit 10? Easy.
I believe so, yes.
So you still think 25 is light?
I wouldn't say that. It's just hard to
know
say a year from now where will these things be. So we'll start to get to state aid now. I think I shared some of these clips with the Warrant Committee before, so I won't go too much into that other than to just note that the economy is doing well. Our local economy is doing well. State tax revenues are not doing so well, which has resulted in less state aid in fiscal '25 than anticipated. Once you take the state aid coming to the town, plus the assessments the state charges, our net state aid is actually going down from fiscal '24 to fiscal '25. So some of these graphs and data I've shared before, so I won't go into them too much, only just to note those changes. This graph isn't great, but it just shows how the last couple of years, aid has been better for cities and towns. Now fiscal 25 seems back kind of what should be typical, expected. And free cash, another revenue source for us is the free cash at the end of the prior fiscal year. And we had $4.4 million a couple years ago. This year is 3.3, of which we've appropriated $400,000 for the school building committee, leaving us about $2.9 million of that. And that's the other revenue sources that we've discussed about pulling into the budget. Free cash, I mentioned the $400,000 appropriation. The capital budget includes a $955,000 from appropriation from free cash for capital items. There's about $156,000 that we've received for the opioid settlements that are counted in that free cash but can't be spent on anything other than efforts related to those issues. And then that left us about a $1.8 million unallocated amount. And I don't think we talked about the trash fees when I was here last. So the select board did vote last night to increase trash fees beginning in fiscal 25 by $1 per sticker, or $1 per week if you get the cart. So that would be another $52 a year for the cart. That's billed once annually. There's a senior citizen discount, which is 60% of the charge. So the senior citizen rate will go up to $125. That will generate, we anticipate, approximately $380,000 of revenue. The effect of, we'll just have to see how that goes, but we feel pretty decent about that estimate now. And then just in terms of background on this, our expenses have outpaced that revenue as the sticker prices stayed the same, but our solid waste budget has gone up. And over the past couple of years, the difference between what we bring in or anticipate bringing in the revenue and what our solid waste costs us has grown to about $500,000. By raising the fee, we bring that a little bit closer and reduce some of that taxpayer support to the solid waste program that the town operates. And I'll just note, this does not account for anything to do with recycling. This is collection and disposal of trash.
Is there any town where that's not a loss?
Well, I live in Boston and we don't pay. So,
But I mean, that it's more, that whatever
Yeah.
the fee covers more of the actual cost of it.
I would be surprised if that were the case. But it does vary town to town. I've been in touch with one community near us that's starting to look at how they want to do it. Foxborough does not provide any curbside pickup at all. If you want curbside collection, you get a private hauler. I worked previously in Medfield. It was the same there. It was no curbside collection of recycling or trash. You had to get a private hauler, bring your trash to the transfer station. So it's an expensive proposition, and this would help mitigate some of those expenses on the budget.
And can you remind me the financial situation with recycling? I feel like we pay more.
The market, so for a long time, recycling might be cost neutral to cities and towns because there was a market to purchase those recycled goods. That has really gone away, and the cost of recycling, we can get that for you. I don't have it, and I don't want to misspeak on it, but it's another substantial cost to the taxpayers at this point.
Thank you.
Sure. So health insurance, I wanted to speak about health insurance because it's one of the ways we were able to reduce expenses for fiscal 25. We are self-insured, so that means both the town and employees pay into a health insurance trust. The trust pays out our claims. There was a significant drop in claims during COVID. This had been experienced it's everywhere, and it resulted in the town's healthcare trust having being in strong financial condition. And we've been using that status as a way to mitigate increases on town and employees. Last year, if you'll recall, there was a 0% premium increase. This year, the budget, as recommended, is based on having a 3% premium increase, but having a premium holiday for a pay period, which means, one pay period, both the town and employees won't be paying any healthcare costs. It'll just erode the trust slightly, try to maintain in good financial condition, and then have that funding available for potential higher increases in future years. So that is one tool that we are using to balance the budget. That is an erosion of our trust, essentially a use of one-time funds in the fiscal 25 budget. Yes.
So, isn't that similar to last year when we had a plan to fully fund the retirement plan? And I said, oh, couldn't we use some of that money and not fully fund it? We're going to fully fund it earlier than our schedule requirement to fund. And the response, if I recall, was that, no, we're on schedule, this is what we usually pay in, we need to keep paying in. So why would we recommend a holiday for the premium and not just continue to fund as we typically do so that we're covered? It seems like we should be doing a similar, staying on pace with what we would do, much like the retirement fund and what we did last year.
So this has nothing to do with retiree health insurance?
I know.
And they're different trusts.
But it's a trust, and because COVID claims went down, what if everybody starts, you're saying we're going to erode the trust by doing this?
Correct, but not to the extent that we would have those concerns. If there is a high claim year and we do this, I think we would be in position to have a regular year next year. If it's a low claims year, maybe next year we can, again, mitigate some of those potential premium increases or have another holiday. So it really depends on where claims end up in the next year, but we feel with the projections that we have that the trust will remain in good financial condition, and it is prudent at this time to go forward with a holiday, return some of that money back to the employees, and reduce some of the burden on the town as well.
To balance the budget. Would you just do this without trying to balance the budget because we feel like we need to balance the budget?
I don't.
Or would you do this
I wouldn't
every
say
year,
that
try to do that?
that's not necessarily driving the bus. I think, acknowledging that the trust is in very good financial condition and not wanting to continue to grow that beyond what we need to, it gives us this opportunity to reduce everybody's costs.
2% increase instead of 3%?
Okay. I mean, we could then you start to where we feel comfortable with projection is what we've proposed. Where our broker and advisor came in was 4% increase with no holiday, and so we understand where their feelings are. We feel okay with where the trust is to go forward with this. And we've been we haven't had to do plan design changes in several years, which is a good benefit. It's never a good experience for employees to have to go through changing plan design. We have a deductible plan, but it's not a high deductible plan. $400 for an individual, $800 for a family. So we're still able to offer pretty decent benefits, especially in the municipal setting, because this remains in good financial condition. We don't need to start making those changes quite yet.
And what does the town pay versus the employees?
On active plans, it's 76.26. I'm sorry, that doesn't add up to 100. 76.24.
That would work. Okay.
So if we talk about how we arrived at a balanced budget with these revenues, the main changes are the infusion of free cash, using some of our dwindling and final ARPA federal funds, and then increasing those trash fees, as I've mentioned, which gets us to balanced overall on both level service budget asks. And I just included, in terms of the town departments and the school departments here, what that means in dollar numbers. And this is just to kind of summarize how we've been using that free cash. It doesn't necessarily wrap in all of our one-time monies, but I wanted to speak about free cash explicitly. So last year we had about $2.7 million in one-time things that we categorized as one-time expenses, from the capital budget to the reserve fund, to payments into the general stabilization fund, to payments into the OPEB trust. We used $1.6 million to continue to maintain some services, and then over and above that, $970,000 that was shared between towns and schools to invest in some additional services for those departments. And then in fiscal '24, it's a shorter list. But, so $955,000 for the capital budget, $67,000 in some sick leave buyback, which would be a one-time expense, then the reserve fund and the opioid settlements that I mentioned, and lastly, about $1.5 million that's going into the budget to maintain services. That's the free cash breakdown.
Can I ask about the previous slide?
Sure.
So that's the use of free cash. Now, I believe we also had $650,000 of ARPA last year.
Yep.
So when we talk about one-time money that was spent on recurring things, it would be, am I correct, 1.6 million plus $650,000?
There was additional ARPA expenses over and above that between the school department efforts and on the town side. But that's what, yeah, that's not everything, but that's almost all of it. And we can get you a little bit more detail on that.
So it's a little more, so 1.6 plus 650 gets you 2.25. You're saying it's a little more than 2.25?
Yes.
Okay.
For what we were put for ARPA, so what we were paying for maintaining services that we had received ARPA money from,
Correct.
2.5. Okay.
And we're not putting
Any.
any money into stabilization?
This budget does not include anything going into stabilization, correct?
Don't we typically put money into stabilization?
Yes. We had, I shouldn't say typically, we did in fiscal
Lori, can you
24.
please repeat your question so we can all hear it, please?
I
Thank
was
you.
asking if fiscal '24 had state money going into our general stabilization fund. The answer is no, and I asked why, because my understanding is that we typically put money into stabilization.
Yes, that's something we did last year. $500,000 was appropriated to the general stabilization fund. In prior years, the town had withdrawn from stabilization in some of the COVID years, and then it had put that money back in. So last year was new money going in. There is no new money going in this year's budget. I'll just note kind of, with hitting that retirement full funding, $1 million going into the pension system is a good place to kind of invest in reserves generally. And investing in our OPEB at the level that we are is a good way to manage some of those funds. So that's where, when we were approaching the budget, looking at how those monies are being used and investing in our reserves and long-term liabilities.
Will we continue to invest at the same rate for OPEB and the retirement fund?
The OPEB policy that's been approved by the select board identifies $2.5 million growing at 2.5% a year as the select board's goal. And that was with the caveat that if the retirement system, for example, does set a funding schedule that has additional money going to it over and above full funding, then that $2.5 million goal will be offset by that. So this year, the example would be $1 million going to retirement, $1.5 million going to OPEB, hitting our goal of $2.5 million going to those long-term liabilities.
And so we have no policy on general stabilization.
There is no written reserves policy. It's been the practice and goal of the town to achieve about 5% of that the budget, the general fund budget in stabilization.
As balance in stabilization. So wouldn't we, and will you remind me of the difference between the general stabilization fund and the reserve fund?
So the reserve fund is appropriated annually and it's for unexpected, unanticipated expenditures in that fiscal year. And that right now is $250,000 proposed for fiscal '25. So that is appropriated at town meeting, spent or not in that fiscal year, and then anything that's not spent in it closes to free cash. Stabilization is a separate account. Appropriations out of it require approval of 2/3 of town meeting for any of those stabilization funds. The reserve fund is subject to the approval of the warrant committee.
So if we needed money, because we didn't put money into stabilization and we needed more money, can we take it out of the retirement fund or OPEB?
The options there would be to not put money into those funds as a way to cut costs. And one thing that's been, I think that's the best way to look at it, is to not make a contribution to OPEB in a dire financial year. The retirement system is a little bit different because that is a funding schedule set for 2 years, and once it's in place, the town is obligated to make that payment. The retirement board is a separate political entity and has its own fiduciary responsibility to the retirement system. So that is in place for 2 years, so it would be a little bit trickier there depending on where you are in that cycle. But the OPEB is a place where you could skip an investment or skip an appropriation in a if if budgets are going down, revenues are going down because there's another great recession. Maybe that's not the time to invest in OPEB, maintain some of your services. Once the economic winds get better, return to funding those long-term liabilities.
Thanks.
And just for the purposes of our new members and the 4 to 8 people who are watching at home, OPEB is other post-employment benefits such as pensions.
OPEB is primary health insurance, so retiree health insurance, and like maybe a little bit of dental and life insurance that might be rolled into it, but it's primarily health insurance for retirees from when they retire and then through Medicare and the Medicare programs that we offer.
Thank you. And then, so you talked about the difference between the reserve fund and a stabilization fund. What is the purpose of the stabilization fund?
So it's there to be used in. We don't have a policy written for it, but the intent is to be the last gap reserve for the town. Build it up in good economic times, have it there in bad economic times, and that was illustrated in the COVID years. It was there to help support services when everybody expected revenues to take a hit, state aid to take a hit. Draw it down at those times, build it back up during the good times.
So when we talk about the rainy day fund, is that the rainy day fund?
Yes, that's a way to refer to it.
Thank you. Tom?
Ms. Milano, just to ask you a general question about the stabilization fund, does that, and I remember hearing something last year around this time, you were talking about capital projects. Does a failure to maintain a balance or contribute to the stabilization fund in any way negatively affect our bond rating?
Yeah, I mean, the bond rating agencies will look at the health of the town broadly, and that's one way they'll look at it. They'll look at the town's fund balance, and but making contributions to stabilization is generally regarded as good, but minimizing risk to the town's financial status is treated, whether that's by investing in stabilization or setting monies aside elsewhere, is generally what they're looking to see, and just safeguarding the town's financial stability.
No, that makes sense. So, but it's not. Is it a major factor, or is it just one of, as you said, is it one of many?
I'd say it's one of the more important factors that are looked at.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you remind me, when we used stabilization funds in the past, figure COVID for service, those recurring, so we used it for things that would be ongoing expenses, but then that would be in the general fund.
Sorry, so we're having a hard time hearing on Zoom. I don't know if you're mic'd. Is that Amanda?
It's Amanda. Wait, is this, whoop. Green light?
No.
Yeah, green light. It was on. Okay, can you repeat my question?
Sure.
Can you hear me now, Julie? Or to Julia? Better?
Yeah, that's better,
Okay.
thanks.
Yep. So did you understand my question? So do we use it for things that would be recurring expenses for the following fiscal?
That is my understanding. I wasn't here that year. I assume it would have been just going into the budget to preserve services.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm getting.
I was trying
yes.
to
Yeah.
remember. So it's not
I assumed,
necessarily
but
for
yes.
one-time expenses, it can be for recurring expenses.
Right. Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify, so we have a 2.5% increase on property taxes this upcoming on this budget for next year?
It's not as straightforward an answer. So we can increase the amount of money that we can raise from property taxes by 2.5%. What that might mean for an individual property owner is not necessarily a 2.5% increase on the taxes you pay. It'll vary based on the value of the home, how the value of your home has changed, but the levy, the total amount of money that we can raise from property taxes can increase by 2.5%, plus any new growth that is generated from new construction, renovations, and That's what would wrap up new growth.
So our houses will be reassessed?
They're reassessed they're looked at consistently every year by the assessors. Your value is adjusted annually. The Department of Revenue comes in every 5 years and does a full revaluation of the town's properties. That happened this year, this summer. So the assessor's office just went through that with the Department of Revenue for a more in-depth review of the property values in town.
So I'm understanding this upcoming year, there will be an increase to property taxes to some, and can you give me a general idea of like $1 million house, what that would be?
So the average house is just over $1 million now, and last year, the average single-family tax bill went up. I think it was like 3.2% or something. The average house and the average commercial property both increased 3.2%, but I can get that number to be exact, but that sounds about right.
Yeah, okay, awesome. And then can you give me the debt that we're taking over? So were we just taking that 2.5 that we will have to carry, like unless we have free cash next year or some way of, we will be carrying that debt for next year?
So it's like what we're paying with one-time funds?
Yes.
Yes, we will. That is a hole for fiscal '26 that will have to be filled in.
Somehow calculated. Okay.
So with fiscal '26, obviously, we'll have the 2.5% levy increase, any new growth that comes in, any adjustments to local receipts, and any state aid. But that will be the money that we have to play with at the beginning.
Sure.
But yes, anything that's one-time monies in this year would remain a unfunded item essentially next year to be funded.
So is it safe to say if we had $1 million with school, we're doing basic level, and we had $1.8 million, that's around 2.9 plus the 2.5, we could be in a needs base or things that, the town's carrying over to what we know we'll need next year. That we're at like 5.4.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it.
I just wanted to overall big picture. Thank you so much.
Sure. I didn't have anything else. I think that ties it together in terms of this budget doesn't solve any structural financial challenges facing us as a town, and our expenditures are outpacing our revenue growth. Collective bargaining agreements expire in '25. This budget absorbs the savings from the pension system hitting full funding, so there won't be another $2.5 million of money flowing to the fiscal '26 budget. That's new. State aid declined in this year, as we've talked about, so it's not a place we can rely on significant places of growth. It'd be fantastic if we get back to kind of what we saw in the past couple of years, but I don't know that it's something we can expect, or we can hope for it, but we shouldn't expect it. And then, obviously, the school project continues to move forward. Hope to have a designer under contract this month to keep that project moving, and that will result in a heavy capital request for town meeting and voters to take up. So my optimism ends with next year will be challenging, just like this year was, and that this budget hasn't magically resolved any of these kind of ongoing financial challenges that we do face.
I just have one question. So this is a balanced budget for this ring, but are we expecting any debt exclusions for next year that you're aware of for before we hit the new year?
At our previous select board meeting, Sean O'Rourke from the school building committee indicated that with the schedule that the designer is working towards, it would mean a project ready for the town's consideration in the fall.
The fall, okay.
And so that would be a debt exclusion for a school project for that full project.
Have you received any idea of how much that would be?
I think in the documents that were released, it was identified as $80 million, $90 million project. But there will be, I think, 2 cost estimates throughout the process. At least 1 cost estimate, but I believe there's 2 built into the process ahead of any vote.
So I just have a follow-up question to that, if you don't mind. So if we were looking at $80 million for this year, end of this year, and we are carrying possibly, was it your opinion that we should have possibly went for an override, or the select board should have voted for an override?
Hold on a second.
Just-
Nick is
Oh.
is directed to give us a balanced
Okay.
budget. So
I just was
is that
curious.
a question that you feel comfortable answering, Nick?
As your-
No, I think I'll answer it in the sense of the town
Bad-
does need one to address the
Yeah.
financial shape we're in, whether this year or next year. I think at this point, we will have probably run out some of our options that we've been able to use in the fiscal 24 and fiscal 25 budget to fund at a level service level without an override, but to invest in those needs that I've heard from my department heads, I know the school committee has heard loud and clear about, would trip that
Awesome.
over towards.
I appreciate it. That's what I was pretty much wondering. We're going to need one, either way.
Well, we've been talking about it for 2 years.
So if we do that, then it's possible that we could be talking about 2 overrides next year, one for debt exclusion, probably first,
Right.
followed by an operational override for the town budget,
Correct.
which right now, we're looking at like something like 1.75 for schools is not met in the needs-based request, and then another 1.5, so let's just call that 3. So we start at 3 from our needs-based not met now, and then in an override situation, we would look to fund ourselves for years forward, right? So we could be, it would be more than that, than the 3. So that's what we could be looking at next year. That's within the realm of possibility?
Yeah, and I just, as Allison pointed out, that you'd have to then also ensure that the other items in the budget that are funded with one-time monies have a recurring source of funding.
Right.
So it's over and above that to
Right.
achieve, stability for a few years.
A few years. Right.
And just in the context of the school, I'll just add just kind of one piece that I think is important to point out in terms of how the school project funding would work is if approved in the fall, design work would still need to be done, then site work would start, then final design work, and then the construction would start. So the way the project would be phased, the town wouldn't go out and borrow $80 million the day after a vote is approved. So we would borrow in
Right.
chunks as needed. As construction goes, we bring in more. So as we then start paying that debt service back, you'll start to feel that on your property tax bills. So it's just a way that wouldn't be one day it's your tax bill is $1,000, the next day it's $1,200. It would be phased in over a course of a couple of years. Whereas with an operating override, that's obviously effective right away in that fiscal year. And that impact would be felt within that fiscal year.
Can I ask a follow-up to your school building? What happens then after it's complete? How do we operate? Like, where does that money for the cost of it go? Is that another operating override, or is that, how is that budgeted?
That you'd have to speak to.
Okay, I was just
those
like, I was
following
just
me.
curious.
And I don't know how that would be staffed, but
Yeah.
those are good questions.
Thank
It's
you.
going to be Amanda and then Judy.
I think that goes to, your question goes to a similar one, which is, so not having gone through an override before, so right now, the way that we're looking at the budget is to get to a level budget so that there isn't, so that we can operate, right? But as you're looking at the school, or as you were looking at the town, and then looking at what collective bargaining agreements are coming up in '25, would that, if you're looking at an override, like the way we're looking at it now is sort of for immediate needs. If you're looking at an override, do you take like a 5-year or whatever years out view of it and say, okay, understanding there's going to be a new school, like if you're from a school perspective, okay, understanding there's going to be a new school, you'd have to staff that, here are the needs. So do you look at the budget, the numbers in that regard? Am I making sense? Like, so you're not looking at it like, so right now we're saying, like, pick a number, 4.5 million. But if you were budget planning for an override, those numbers might look different because you're looking at staffing for many years out because you're not solving for just 1 year, correct?
That is that's why it's hard. Because ideally, you'd be trying to raise a number that would guarantee to the best of anybody's ability that, hey, look, we won't come back for a couple of years because of where we've arrived at an override number, how we're going to use that, how we're going to phase things in. But by the flip side, a taxpayer could say, well, if you're not going to need these things in the first year, why are you going to tax me for them? So I think it's building in stability to it, but doing so carefully and prudently, and not, going too far in one year that upsets it. And some of those solutions could be setting aside another source of revenue into a tax stabilization fund that says, hey, let's put $1 million in free cash aside, knowing we might need it over the next 3 years to balance budgets, rather than work that into an override if it's not necessarily needed right away in the first year. So there's different options and different approaches that cities and towns have taken. I've seen one community that had an agreement between the select board and I think the school committee that their budgets would come in at a certain percentage over the next several years. So, okay, yeah. So that's something I've seen in different ways. So there's different ways to approach it. Starts with consensus across the board and also kind of keeping in mind the impacts to taxpayers.
And I had a question about, and you might have gone over this, but so did it come through that towns can, am I right about this, control the rate of the excise tax rate? Did you go over that? And so did we do anything with that?
The governor proposed a change that would allow cities and towns to add a 5% surcharge. So if your excise tax bill is $100, Milton could add a 5% surcharge to your bill, so it would be $105, and the $5 would remain with the town. The governor proposed that in a bill called the Municipal Empowerment Act that had a lot of other changes, but that, to my knowledge, hasn't progressed yet.
Okay.
So I don't think it would play or have an impact in fiscal '25.
Judy.
Thank you, Dave. My question goes to the budget that you're presenting. Does that include balance for the school as well?
Yes.
And sort of on that same, so they're satisfied with the money that's in your budget and will not be seeking any more?
I don't think that's true.
They'll be here this evening and can answer that question. What was presented as a balanced budget is just funding at a level service point, not investing in other needs that we know are important to the schools, as well as other needs that are important to town departments.
Thank you.
She's a pistol.
She'll be here all night.
Can I ask another question that came up? Is it, you mind? I think it came up in the meeting, was it last night, around, so understanding where we are right now with legal costs, like is there, so I know we have we have a retainer for legal fees, I would assume, or it's like a set budget for legal fees, but then we've hired somebody that's over and above our typical legal fees. So how are we for that, or do we, like it seemed like there was money that we have for it. So is that money, so if we're setting aside similar like money in case of emergency and illegal, is that something that could be looked at for next year if there were other funding that was looking to be had? Like is that a possible area of reserve funds?
So the legal budget has the retainer, which pays for town council services, but we have professional services budgeted in the law department as well. And that has, and this year will be sufficient up until now. Obviously, it remains to be seen the impact of the Attorney General's litigation. In terms of impacts for next year, it's unknown at this point. In the public filings related to the court case, if we've posted them on the town website, if you want to take a look at them, the Attorney General is seeking a calendar by which point that this case would be argued at the Supreme Judicial Court in May. So if that, there was a hearing on that today, and that town council was at, the town submitted a brief that was submitted to the court yesterday. That's posted on our website, disagreeing with the Attorney General's request, but it still remains entirely possible that this case could be argued and heard in this fiscal year and be done by May. We'll expect more clarity on that in the next week or two, but at this point, there's a possibility there wouldn't be any impact in fiscal '25. It's an unknown. There's not additional money set aside for it. The reserve fund is there for extraordinary expenses. And that has been in place. I think in fiscal '22, there was a reserve for the legal department budget, legal department for town council services, because of there were a couple of 40B matters that had gone to court that year.
So the money is being funded from the legal fund or from that other services?
So we have, within the entire town council law department budget, there's the retainer flat fee, which is $75,000 a year for town council's main services, and then there's an additional item called professional service. I think it's budgeted at $270,000 and has been at that level for a few years now.
So in a typical year, do we use that money? That's like that 270, or does it carry over and go to free cash? Like what's gone on with it?
Yes, sorry, I'm just trying to pull it up. We were just talking about that earlier.
And can you give us examples of like other things? Because like we have that EPA on the Guile. That's like, so other examples of what we use each one for?
So in fiscal '23, it was underspent. So there was about $100,000 turn back in fiscal '23 because there was less of a demand on professional services. The prior year required a $40,000 reserve fund transfer. So fiscal '23 was underspent by 100, fiscal '22 was overspent by 40. So that's 2 years of history with two different results, just showing it really kind of depends on what's going on. Other examples of litigation would be, so professional services funds labor counsel. So when we negotiate with our unions, and when we've had protracted negotiations like we have this year, we are at arbitration with the firefighters. That costs money. That's billed not under our retainer. It's a separate attorney who manages labor counsel issues. Our litigation, the town's litigation with the FAA, which has been in federal court. We sued the MBTA over Milton Station last year, if you recall. Appellate tax board, so there are properties in town who say, hey, you valued us too high, our taxes are wrong. They take us to the appellate tax board. That's something where town council will defend us, and that would be a special service over and above the retainer. So it's those kinds of items.
So it's all legal. It's just like different types of.
Yeah, and it's usually matters that require court action, court filings. And 40B appeals, most of them have settled at this point. The town took 711 Randolph Ave to the SJC, Supreme Judicial Court, and was defeated there. 582 Blue Hill Ave, which is a 40B project, settled. The East Milton project, the Falcone project, that settled out of court. And the main one that's ongoing now is 648 Canton Avenue. So that is the one that's still not settled and still ongoing. And the town isn't necessarily the main defendant and not incurring a lot of expenses, but it's one there we can.
Thank you.
Sure.
Do you know how much money we've spent so far on like the Canton and the Ave one?
I don't know. Again, in those cases where the town has issued the comprehensive permit, the abutters who have appealed against the town, but usually the developer is defending the process and the comprehensive permit. So while we incur expenses, it's not to the extent that we might normally, where the town was pushing the appeal on 711 Randolph Ave. That's where we are the primary cause of those expenses.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Jay, I can't believe you don't have a question.
Not at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Is anyone? Yeah, Lori.
Have we ever done this premium holiday with health insurance?
Yeah, a couple of times a few years ago. I think Jay has some information on that.
I've been holding my tongue. I do have more to say about the healthcare.
Want to say it?
Yes, I do.
Oh boy. You just
It sounds like the door is open. Is now a good time to talk about healthcare?
If the chair and the committee think it is.
Nick, you want to talk about healthcare?
Sure.
Let's talk about healthcare.
Seems delighted.
Okay, yeah, I will
share a presentation I did because I realize we have guests and I don't want to take too long, but this is a big issue in this year's budget. So I want to be sure that the warrant committee understands what we're doing, why we're doing it, and if we have any other options. So, and I spoke about the medical trust a little bit a couple of meetings ago, and I'll explain it more in a second. But the medical trust has grown to an unreasonably large size. So what the town administrator is proposing is a premium holiday. So no health insurance premiums will be paid by the town or the employees for 1 2-week period. And to answer your question, this was done in 2018, 2019. This premium holiday will be a benefit to the employees of about $140,000 in their pocket, and to the town about $450,000. So let me give an overview of what is the medical trust. So it's a bucket of money. Every month, money goes into the bucket with health insurance premiums. The town and the employees pay health insurance premiums. And every month, town employees and retirees go to the doctor submits the bill, and money comes out of that bucket. So what you want is for the money going into and out of that bucket to be about the same over, let's say, a year. It's not going to match exactly every month, but you generally want it to be about the same. And the analogy I've been using is your checking account. You don't want your checking account to be too empty, because then if a big bill comes in, you need enough to pay it. But also it shouldn't be too full. If the checking account has way too much money, you should be using that money in a better way. I do want to give a caveat here. We can never take money out of the healthcare trust. And when I'm talking, I'll probably be a little sloppy and I'll say something like, let's take this money out. What I mean is putting less money in. I just want to throw that out to begin with. So how is the healthcare trust doing this year? Don't worry about this page. I got this from Amy Dexter. It gives all the information about the healthcare trust. I'm not going to go into it. I'll give a summary on the next page. What it says that our money bucket should be about 20 to 30% of our annual claims. That's that baby bear range. You don't want it too small, you don't want it too big. Right now, we have about 40% of annual claims in the trust. A couple years ago, we had over 50%. So right now, the trust has about $6 million. If we're taking our advisor's advice of going to that 20 to 30% range, we should have between $3 and $4.5 million. We have $6 million.
I just love them.
So that's between $1.5 and $3 million of excess money that we have that is really above and beyond what is, it's extra prudent. And that money, in some sense, you can think of it as belonging 76. I'm probably going to get sloppy and say 75, but about 3/4 of that is can be thought of as town money, and about 1/4 of that can be thought of as employee money. So what are we proposing? What the town administrator is proposing? So he's proposing a premium holiday, and you ask a great question. Why don't we just keep premium increases low instead of a premium holiday? Well, we're looking at two options here. One is keep premiums flat or low until the trust excess decreases to a reasonable level. That's good because it's predictable. It's predictable for us, it's predictable for our employees. Bad thing is, it's money that's tied up. And so one thing that's just bad in and of itself, it's money that's tied up. And also the employees who, and I should put overpaid in quotes, overpaid during COVID year into the trust, those are individual people. And as years go on, new employees are hired, old employees go away. The sooner we bring this trust down to a reasonable level, the sooner the benefit flows to the same employees who put the money into there. So the other option we're looking at is a premium holiday, which has been done in the past, within the past decade. So we're ready to implement it. It's a closer match between the individuals who paid that money into the trust and who are benefiting now. One bad thing is, for example, the town's budget. The town's budget is going to pop back up next year. And this is what happened in fiscal year 20, and the warrant committee and the town administrator at the time said, oh, look at this, health insurance is going up by 15, 20%, this is terrible. Well, it wasn't really going up, it was going back to normal. There is, I've got down here, fundamental rule. This is all about timing. We can pay now, we can pay later. We're not going to magically create any more money, also not going to decrease the money. It's all about timing. When is it going in? So what's going to be the effect of this one period premium holiday on the trust? to answer that question, I'm going to have to digress a little bit and say, how have our claims been running? And what are our claims going to be next year? Well, our claims for the past 6 years have been pretty flat. You can see that dip during the COVID year, but they've been remarkably flat. So they haven't been going up. This is not a sophisticated analysis, it's just total claims, been pretty flat. I do want to give an aside that we have medical stop loss insurance. So if we have an employee who has a heart transplant next year, we're not going to have to write $1 million check out of here. We have insurance that covers anything over $175,000. I mentioned that just to say, if you're worried, what if claims go up by a lot, or if something unexpected happens, we do mitigate that. So our claims have been flat the past year. What are we expecting for next year? Well, next year, I checked some national consulting companies, at least 2 of these I used to work for, and they're saying nationwide in the United States, we expect healthcare claims to go up. We've got a range from 5 to 9% here. Our carrier is expecting our claims to go up over 13%. I do have to give a caveat. Amy Dexter read the numbers differently than me. She thinks they're going up 9%. Anytime I disagree with Amy Dexter, she's probably right, but it looks like 13% to me, and I want to be super conservative with what I'm showing you. So, I think our carrier is saying our claims are going up 13% next year, even though they've been flat over the past 6 years. I can't explain why, but they're the experts, so I'm going to take their numbers and go with it. When I ask, what is this plan going to do to the trust? As I said, the trust is about 40% of claims this year. Remember, we want the trust to be between 20 and 30% of claims. That's our magic number. If you look on the left-hand side, that's me saying, all right, this year, we've got 1 premium holiday. We've got the premiums going up by 3%. Claims are going up by 13%. Okay, that brings us down to 31% at the end of the year. So we're at the top of that range. And then over the next couple of years, things go up sort of a more national average. Then we get down to the bottom end of that range. Okay, now what if that 13% is way too conservative? Or what if I'm wrong and Amy Dexter's right and it's not 13%, it's 9%? Well, I've got 8% here. If claims go up by 8% in the next 3 years, then we're above that baby bear range of 20% to 30%. We're, for the next 3 years, over 30%. So if we think having an overfunded trust is something that's not desirable, then we're still overfunded. So now here's a question. Question for all of us. We're doing 1 premium holiday, 1 2-week period. Should we consider an additional premium holiday? If we do that, it'll save the town $450,000 for the coming year. It'll save the employees $140,000. And this should be thought of as one-time funds. We talked about spending one-time funds on ongoing expenses. It's not a great thing. This would be one-time funds. Is it appropriate? I don't want to speak for Mr. Milano, but I will say it's not currently in the proposed budget. He can give his opinion if it's appropriate or not. But I wanted us to at least think about the option. So what are the cons? Well, if we leave money in the trust, then future premium increases can be smaller. And if we take money out and use it on one-time money, use it on ongoing expenses, we're spending one-time money on ongoing expenses, which is not great. What's good? Well, getting money back to the employees, that's a good thing. Returning the trust to a more appropriate level. As we said, it's overfunded. Our consultants who are paid to keep an eye on this stuff say that it's overfunded right now. Another point I'd like to make, we don't need to spend the money. There's 2 different choices. Choice 1 is, do we have the premium holiday and get them, I was about to say it, not put the money into the trust? And choice 2 is, do we spend that on operating expenses? We can make choice number 1 and not make choice number 2. We can do a premium holiday and put the money into stabilization or reserve. I think you asked earlier, Lori, are we doing this to balance the budget, or are we doing it because we think it's right? In my opinion, we're doing it because we think it's right. The trust is too high. But I will say, if we do spend the money, these one-time funds on the operating budget, then, and I had to make a last-minute change because Mr. Milano corrected me, we saw from his presentation, we're currently spending, we should be spending 0 in one-time funds on operating budget, but we're not. But we are spending about $800,000 less in this year's budget than we did in last year's budget. Last year was 2.3 million, let's call it. And this year it's 1.5 million. Does that add up? So those numbers should be zero. But if we were okay doing 2.3 million last year, are we okay with doing more than 1.5 this year? That's something for all of us to decide. So where would that leave us, at least as far as a medical trust? So these numbers, not going to be a big shock. They're just a little bit lower than what we saw a couple slides ago. If we have a 13% claims increase next year, we'll still be in that good range of 20 to 30% for the next couple of years, and then we'll drop down. Again, pay me now or pay me later. We'll have to start paying later. If the healthcare inflation is not 13%, if it's a more average number of 8%, or even lower, because as we saw, our plan has not seen increases the past few years, then we're still right at or above the top of that range for the next 3 years. So that's what would happen if we do an additional claims holiday. I'm not saying it's a good option. I'm not saying it's a bad option. I'm saying it's an option.
So the schedule that you had just showed a 3% premium increase in '25 and then jumping to 8% in '26.
I'm saying that because I'm thinking that we generally want the money going into the bucket and the money going out of the bucket to keep on keeping on. So if the claims are going up by 8%, then the premiums, I'm assuming we would want to match that.
But if we're overfunded,
That,
then why, like, again, I'm back to why are we increasing at 3% this year
instead of 0.
instead of 2.5, 1.5?
And the claims and the premium holiday, not the premium holiday. I mean, one consideration is the employee's paycheck. For a premium holiday, that's great. They see that in 1 month. And I'm getting out over my skis here, but you know, month after month after month, except for that premium holiday, they see a certain cost in their paycheck. And then if next year it pops up, as reasonably as can. Yeah, there are lots of variables we could tweak. We could say 1 premium holiday and 0 increase. And that would get us about the same place. That would get us, I can't remember, not 450, maybe 300,000. And one thing, I didn't have a place to say this, but if we keep it overfunded, and as Mr. Milano said, there's virtues of that because you can use it later, then we're sort of treating the healthcare trust as a savings account, savings place. I want the healthcare trust to be the healthcare trust, and I want our savings to be our savings. If I could wave a magic wand and take $1 million out of the healthcare trust and put it in the stabilization account, at least then we'd all see that's our savings, and not, well, we have some savings here, we have some savings there, we have some savings elsewhere. That's my opinion.
I have a question. So how do we do it? What number are we looking at? And then how do we, I guess, move that money from the trust bucket to, say, stabilization? How would we actually do that?
Well, plan A would be, if that's what we want to do, plan A would be we persuade Mr. Milano and Ms. Dexter that this is a great idea and we all agree. But I think the answer is, I mean, in the warrant, every question says to see what sum of money the town will allocate for such and such. If we all agree and we get Ms. Dexter to calculate, okay, here's what the employee benefit number should be, it'll be approximately $450,000 less than what's in the budget right now. And we say the appropriation will be this number. And that would be what we would agree on, that would be what would go before town meeting. Now, if we spent that to hire people, that then go back up a little bit, because we're hiring people and have to pay for the health insurance.
And so if someone...
Is that the question you're asking?
I think so, right. And then, so if someone's some other place, our recommendation could be to increase an appropriation here, and then the rest of it, according to sort of how it sounds like you've laid out, we would have a new resulting number for stabilization would be your proposal.
I'm not proposing that.
Okay.
I'm saying if we think this is a good idea.
Yep.
I mean, we might think this is good. We're about to hear from the schools. They want money.
Ooh, are you doing this for the schools too?
I don't know. I'm putting it out as an option.
It's for the public good.
Could be.
He's doing
No,
it
no, for the
public
I was
good.
hoping for
It'd
the
be
schools.
everybody.
I am happy to be talking before the schools so that when we hear their needs in the back of our mind, we can think maybe.
Yeah.
Just want to.
Yeah, Nick, let's give you plenty of time. Plenty of time.
The Warrant Committee doesn't decide whether there's a premium holiday or not, doesn't decide what the premium increase will be. That's our recommendation. You'd be cutting the health insurance budget and assuming the town does go forward with a premium holiday and does go forward with adjusting those premium changes. So that's not the recommendation that's before you. So just that's a place, something to keep in mind too. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Do we want to have any discussion about what Jay had to say?
I have my hand up, Dave.
Judy?
Hey, thanks. Can I ask Jay a question?
I love
Jay,
your questions, Judy.
Hi, Jay.
Hello.
Something you said during your presentation, caught my curiosity. You said we have insurance to process claims that are over $175,000. Who paid? Say a claim comes in and the total cost for an employee is $200,000 a year, which is the total.
Okay.
I'm confusing myself, which is the total amount of the claim, perhaps. Who pays that extra $25,000?
Sure. So every year we purchase, it's called stop-loss insurance from someone, I'm not sure who, and we pay a few $100,000 for that stop-loss insurance, and that insurance carrier pays that extra money. So.
To the town or directly to the claims? In other words, do they?
Ms. Dexter would know more about the mechanics, but as far as I can tell, it goes into the trust. So possibly the trust pays the claim and then the stop-loss carrier pays back the trust. Mr. Milano is nodding.
Okay, perfect. Now I understand that. And if I could just go back to your presentation, it said an 8% increase in premiums is possible in future FY budgets. That's a very high increase on health insurance premiums in 1 year.
It is. It's in the high end of the range that I shared from various national consultants. They were talking about this year, but also I wanted to be conservative. I didn't want to say, la-di-da, I think claims are going to be flat in the future. Look at all this money we have. I wanted to say, let's make a somewhat conservative but not crazy assumption. And if we do that, well, then where does the trust stand? And the trust, if the trust is still in that 20-30% range, we can be somewhat confident. But if I made a small assumption about health insurance increases, then sure, I could show you great numbers. Say we're great, we're refunded. Let's put this money in our pocket.
Would you know, like, what the average is in previous years for premium increases?
We have that. I don't have it right in front of me. I don't know, Jay, if you have a couple of years in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, is it premium? I mean, I looked at claims increase. I don't. I have like total claims have been flat for the past 6 years, but that's total claims. I didn't dig down and say, well, how many people were covered? How many people covered their families? So it's not very sophisticated.
Thank you, Jay.
Any other questions?
Nope.
All right.
Dave,
Who?
this is Ron. I just have a
Ron.
question. Hi. Jay, I think I'd just like to thank you for all this hard work. I think this is great, and I know this must have taken a lot of effort, so appreciate the analysis and the explanation. So I just wanted to clarify. So this is your recommendation, but we need to have the recommendation come from the select board, right? So I just wasn't sure, is the select board proposing this, or is this your idea and you would pass this over to the select board, have the select board consider it, and then pass it back to us as a warrant committee? Just wondering our process.
Should I answer or should?
Go ahead.
As I understand the process, we can recommend any dollar amount we want for any budget line item. So we can recommend a smaller dollar amount for the health insurance line item. Now, as Mr. Milano said, that's not the same thing as us in invoking a health insurance premium. That's why I said that, step one would be, let's see if we can come to an agreement with Mr. Milano, because it's Mr. Milano who calls for a health insurance holiday. Now, we could play hardball and say, we cut the budget, what you gonna do about it? I hope we can all behave better that way. But as I view that's, we're talking about the health insurance budget. For other budgets, it's what we say they are. We say a dollar amount. Did that answer your question?
Excuse me.
But to answer your specific question, are we sending back to select board and asking them? My answer is no.
Okay, so it's negotiation with Mr. Milano. If the warrant committee decides to advocate for this.
Right, because ultimately it's town meeting decides this. Is the warrant committee, we make a recommendation. So let's say we theoretically did proceed along these lines. I would imagine Jay would give this presentation at town meeting to explain our thought process. I'm sure the new presentation will have David Hasselhoff in it somewhere. And so we'd want...
Just to kind of, we would need to have had this rate set well before then, so we would have had to have arrived and be on the same page at town meeting. So we'll make it a little bit easier for you.
Are you saying that are you saying it's not possible for us to recommend something along the lines of what he's saying?
I'm saying we will have had to have set the rates before then, and we will want to have arrived at a decision before the end of the month in keeping with what goes in the warrant and all being on the same page on that.
Yep.
So we wouldn't want to get to town meeting and not be kind of set with what the game plan is.
Oh yeah, I understand. So right, so we would need, if we were going to do that, to have come to some kind of a consensus agreement here and not have this end up being a fight on the floor of town meeting. Good. Less fight on the floor of town meeting, the better.
Yes.
Right? But then again, the town, ultimately, the town decides whether, even if we go in with a consensus agreement for the town to consider, they could decide to go with the original budget, right? So ultimately, it's up for them.
Sure.
And then the select board at this point, I think the big call that they have come with is that they have put forward this budget, which is basically, for lack of a better term, year over year. That they said this is the amount of money that we're going to put into the budget, not requesting an override. So basically, no matter what happens, it has to zero out at the end of the day. Yeah, I know.
And just for the feedback in terms of the presentation, my concerns would be about it going to one-time funds. I think we've discussed that enough, so that is why we've approached it the way we have approached it, not wanting to grab additional one-time monies into a budget that we're digging a hole for in fiscal 26. And the flip side of that, also having the flexibility to offer ways to mitigate premium increases in future years. Perhaps next year we'll be able to do a 3% premium increase, another premium holiday, and continue to mitigate potential changes in future years. I think that flexibility is important, and the one-time money is the other element of it too. So on both those fronts, that's why we've approached it and made the recommendation and are looking at the renewal on health insurance that we've described.
And just to summarize, Nick, this is your budget. What specific, what would be your argument against something along the lines of what Jay is talking about here? What would be your argument, if you had to make an argument against it? What would be your argument against it?
So I think it goes back to that. I think it would be to have the flexibility to mitigate potential premium increases in future years, like we have been, a 0% last year, a premium holiday in fiscal '25, potential additional holidays or lower than expected premiums in fiscal '26. Use of one-time funds to fund recurring expenses would, as we've discussed here, there's a lot of that happening in fiscal '25 to continue to load up on that and dig a deeper hole for fiscal '26, and then not have the ARPA federal funds that we don't have anymore, not have the funding in the Health Care Trust to mitigate those challenges in '26. And then there was one more item I wanted to throw out there. What was the third? If it comes to me, I'll bring it back to you.
Not going to change health insurance benefits, or?
I don't see that necessarily as happening right away. A bad claims year and having to have a big jump would be concerning. But the trend has been solid, I think pretty consistent over the past few years. So just not wanting to put into one-time monies and having the ability to mitigate future increases in future years. But continue to work towards getting it as in good financial shape, not as in the financial condition it's in today.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that. If there's no other questions for Mr. Milano, I think we'll go to schools. Come hither. Thank you.
You're going to stay.
My other
probably don't have
Come on up. Come one, come all. Come one, come all.
I don't know if I should have sat in this seat.
It's a hot one.
I will present it.
Wow, it's truly indeed an honor and a pleasure for the Warrant Committee to have
I want to have a seat.
the school committee
Who wants to sit out?
and our superintendent of schools.
Great to be here.
Thank you. The floor is yours.
Great. So I'm going to start us out and talk a little bit about just kind of an overview of how we've approached this budget, a bit about some of the kind of conceptual framework that we use. Glenn is going to talk about level service and then talk about our needs-based budget, and then I'm excited to talk further about kind of your thoughts and ideas on the FY25 budget. So first slide here, this is the MPS strategic goal. In any kind of budget, we should be thinking about where we're headed and not just thinking about what positions do we have and what do we want to add. We need to be thinking collectively. It's something that we talked about a lot as a leadership team in beginning this work. This is my first year with the team. It's been an exciting process. I was at this meeting last year. It was a little bit earlier in the last budget, so it's nice to finally be in the seat now. I had been hired, I think it was the end of January when I came last year. So anyway, I'm excited to be here. I see a lot of my work in terms of budget development and working within the school system as developing things that maybe haven't always been there with a real systems approach. And I'll talk a little bit about that. This kind of relates to what I think some of you have been talking about too in terms of long-range planning, thinking about where we want to be in 3 to 5 years as opposed to just planning every year, what do we have, what can we get, what do we have to get rid of. So that's important to me. I think it's important to our students and important to our systems. So strategic plan, just to refresh everyone's memories, 2022, that was completed. It was the kind of a revision from 2020. There are 3 pillars of learning. These guide, as we're developing our budget, these 3 pillars are guiding all of the different work that's happening to reach the outcomes that we've outlined that fall under these pillars. Next slide is a theory of action. This is relative to the strategic plan, so you can see those 3 pillars over on the left in that Venn diagram. And then they kind of go up and really kind of, this slide really is just to share that we have to be thinking about student outcomes as we're budgeting, and that has to be at the forefront, and then we backwards map from there. I think I've met some of you at some of the forums I did, and have talked and shared my entry plan at the beginning of the year. I am kind of midway through that, or past midway now, through the first listening and learning portion of the year to better understand our community, to engage students, staff, everybody in town to kind of really understand where everybody's coming from and how to approach all of the work that we need to do in the years ahead in a way that brings everybody into the work. It was clear to me when I first started getting to know Milton better that having conversation collectively as a community was important if we were going to put all of our combined energy into our schools, which ultimately is what's going to help our students succeed. If we're split on schools, we're not supporting our students. So we have to be together on schools. That's really, really important. The plan right now, I'm going to be sharing a priority report, which is an analysis, a sharing out of the data I collected through a survey, through all of the listening and learning forums, engaging with staff. I spent days in buildings. I've met with many groups and individuals in town over the last 6 months. All of that information is in the first section of that report. The second section is an analysis of academic excellence, climate, culture, and well-being, and our operations, finance, and facilities. And I just wanted to quickly share some of the draft recommendations from that. So this just gives you a sense of the kinds of things that we're going to be working on collectively in the area of operations, facilities, and finance. This was kind of one of the areas of the entry plan. I'm not going to go into detail on each one of these, but this is just to give you all a sense of what I think is really important is the fact that we know collectively, and something Glenn and I have talked about a lot, is for us to be strong fiscally, we have to be looking at all of the systems that are in place within our school system and to better understand our staffing patterns, our positions that we hired a long time ago that were designed for this purpose, but now as we've changed other structures could maybe flex and move here or there. So there is, this is a multi-year process in looking at and understanding kind of our current structure, helping people to both understand where we are, but also to build systems that don't currently exist to reach and find efficiencies to better utilize the resources that we have. The second slide is just additional recommendations from that area. This first one reflects what I was just mentioning about thinking ahead and planning for, and I know this came up as you were all talking with Nick, thinking about and planning for where we want to be in terms of our budget in 3 to 4 years and understanding our context and where our community is. So these things are important, and it's something that we're thinking about and something that we brought into the budget development for FY25. So our kind of conceptual framework for developing this budget, one important part of this was bringing all of our administrators together to develop a budget collectively as opposed to working individually with leaders at different buildings, understanding what their needs were without connecting our leaders together. So I think we approached this budget on a pretty unified level, and we're sure that we weren't just throwing spaghetti against the wall, but that we were really thinking thoughtfully about the positions that we needed. And our leaders were talking together about kind of where we are at different buildings and what the needs are. So that was, I think, exciting for everyone involved this year in the budget process, and something we'll be building on in years ahead. We also thought about this as a multi-year process, so thinking about what positions we might need next year and then in the coming year. A lot of the work I'm doing this year is better understanding kind of where we are to then start making some of the bigger moves. This is not, like as I think about budget development over the next number of years, if, as we look through the data we collected last week, all of our staff came together in the auditorium and then spent the day at the high school talking about the draft priority report and giving feedback to share what their perspective was on the things that we found in that analysis. So as we kind of like look ahead and think big about what we want our schools to be, that will have implications in terms of budget. It doesn't necessarily mean more money, but it means looking differently at how we use our resources. So that requires a lot of coordination, connection, analysis, clarity, et cetera. That's something that has been a part of the beginnings here of this first budget that I've been a part of leading and developing. I'm now going to pass it to Glenn to share some of the specifics around level service and needs-based budget.
Okay, so as far as a level service budget, our assumptions building into this that it's rolling over existing staff, no new staff, we look at the contractual obligations, and that's common for any level service budget, and we're making the assumption that all staff that are currently funded either by ARPA or ESSER are being rolled into the budget and kept. So that was our underlying assumption. What does it take to maintain the system as it exists today into next year? Just for a list of the ARPA and ESSER functions, funded positions, so you can see the sort of things we're talking about. We had partial funding of a preschool coordinator. We had partial funding of kindergarten aides. They used to be only short days, and now they're full-day kindergarten aides. An ADA 504 team chair for Americans with Disabilities Acts to monitor all those programs. We hired one full-time nurse and 2 part-time nurses. We have now, a floating nurse as opposed to just one at each school and hoping no one's out. We hired a middle school adjustment counselor, math interventionist, high school math teacher, high school sped teacher, 2 board-certified behavioral analysts, BCBAs, who are deal with students who are in some or other level, possibly of crisis. And the select board approved ARPA funding in January, which took effect in February for a school bus, and we would have to maintain that for next year unless we're sending the school bus away. So, I mean, those are the things that are currently funded by ESSER and ARPA. The funding goes away next year, so our underlying assumption was that these positions and the bus were staying. And so that's how the budget was built. So this year's general fund budget, $61.5 million. Those ARPA and ESSER funded positions are just over $1.1 million. So effectively, our budget for this year, including the ESSER and ARPA funds, is $62.7 million. To maintain it, our level service budget is 66.9, and I'll go into that in a little bit, or 67 million roughly. The increase is about 6.8%, but because you're absorbing all that ARPA money, the increase to the general fund is larger. You're looking at a significant increase to the general fund because you're funding the things from ARPA and ESSER that were funded outside the general fund last year. So let's look at those numbers a little bit. What about that, the 6.8% increase? Why that high? 2 pieces. $3 million in staff salary increases, which on the face of it, 5.8% looks fairly high too, and $1.3 million in non-salary costs. So both of those percentages are large, so we need to take dive into those a little more. The salary primarily comes from one source. We have special ed instructional assistants required by individual education programs. We went from 94 of them last year to 104 FTEs, actually this past fall when I did this.
What's an FTE?
Full-time equivalent.
Thank you.
Some of these folks are part-time, some of them are full-time.
We're really good at jargon, just so you know.
So, and it's due to an increase in special ed enrollment. I mean, outcome of the pandemic, outcome of concerned parents wanting to see where their students were, more evaluations and so forth. Once upon a time, the IDEA federal grant used to fund these positions. We get about $1.3 million in the IDEA grant from the federal government, and that's the same number we've gotten for the last 12, 15 years. So once upon a time, $1.3 million covered just about all of our special education aids, and now it covers about a third. So if you have a 5% increase in the cost of your aids, it looks bigger because the outside funding stayed flat. So $775,000 of that increase is just simply due to additional instructional aids. All other staff, once you back those folks out, $2.3 million, a 4.5% increase. That's very consistent. They had a 2.5% COLA this year in their contract, and 2% for steps and lanes is actually on the slightly lower end. I mean, steps and lanes where people get new degrees and their additional step on their salary chart usually runs, at low 1.9, a high 2.2% per year, that without any cost of living increase. So this is 4.5% for everyone but those folks is absolutely what I would have expected and what we would see in really any level service budget. So the cost of the salary increase really has to do with the cost of funding some of our special ed programs. The non-salary increase, which was even a larger number, you've probably gotten tired of hearing me say it if you've looked at any meetings. The OSD approved a 16% raise in an out-of-district special education tuitions this past year after we had set the budget for fiscal '24. So it's an adventure this year, but it'll cost even more next year. I mean, we're trying to figure out how to deal with this. That's $900,000 of this. One other piece was the school bus, which is $90,000, which has just been added, that's the ARPA. And the other piece is athletic costs. We have historically underfunded our athletic budget and have to squirrel it from somewhere else. We've had some successful teams and tournaments cost money and so forth. So that's an adjustment to the budget to make it more in line with reality, actually. But if you back out, again, those three things, all the non-salary costs are 2.2%, which is roughly consistent with inflation. So even though the numbers and percentages look big, they come from just a couple buckets that are really hitting us this year. I don't need to read this one to you because you've done it for the last hour and a half. The current estimates are this is where we are. This is the level service budget is what's being proposed to you. That being said, we would not be doing our duty if we didn't tell you what our needs-based request was, and so we will. Again, going back to the superintendent's priority report, we're looking at pieces, sort of systemic drivers of costs going forward in the system. Multi-tiered systems of support is a lovely piece of jargon. I could have put MTSS in there and fooled you all, but that's these are ways of supporting students who at the lowest level are regular education students but are sort of falling behind, and in the middle level need a little more support, and at the top level maybe individual education plans, and in the special needs world, it's a tiered system of looking at the needs of students, and you need a systemic way of dealing with that. Too often, we find ourselves in the position of saying, oh, let's just put someone here for this, and someone here for that, and someone here for that. And we're really backing off and looking and saying, how are we going to do this, in a systemic, sustainable way to address all these needs as we get more of them. English language learners, we are, and I'll get to this in a minute, we have more and more students whose native language is not English. And there come state requirements with that. Nursing supports, even though we've added more nurses, we have a significant number of students with significant medical issues. Won't go into too much more than that, but we have some with really involved, who are really medically involved and still are in the schools, and we have to be able to support them. And so that is a pinch point in some cases. And then the last piece there is, we've talked for several years about the increased enrollment in the elementary schools. Well, it's bubbling up to the middle school and the high school. And we're starting to see enrollment increases there and stresses on those systems. So just quickly to go through them for the MTSS, so you can have your acronym. We were looking at two extra reading interventionists. We have evidence-based intervention at grades 2 and 3. But not enough capacity to deal fully with grades 4 and 5 at the elementary schools. The adjustment counselors, again, dealing with social emotional needs of students coming out of COVID and so forth. National recommendations is one adjustment counselor for every 250 students. We are not there at any of our schools. And we could use some additional staff there to help deal with the issues our students are facing. These two actually aren't budget requests, but we put them in here anyway because we believe we can do these in a revenue neutral way, but we need to tell you that we're trying these things too. We would like to bring in a couple of administrative assistants for our special education world because of what's happening now is a lot of these team meetings and various different procedural issues are being handled by our staff. Teaching staff, team chair staff, they would be better off servicing students and doing testing that we currently have to contract out. So our idea is to bring in some administrative assistants, level people, to handle all the paperwork. And there's an enormous amount of paperwork in both the EL and special ed world. To handle that paperwork, to free up team chairs and our providers from doing it, so we can we can cancel some of our outside contracts and bring some services back in-house, one where they belong and two where it's much cheaper to provide them by using our own people. So even though this would be an additional 2 people, we believe this pays for itself by reorganizing some of our systems. And the same with the secondary evaluator psychologist position. We are contracting out far too many psycho-ed evaluations because of the demands on us. If a parent wants some of these, they can put in requests for them, and we have to deal with that. And so instead of, again, using contracted providers, we'd like to hire someone to just bring that into house, and we believe that'll be revenue neutral too. So although not specifically an ask, it would look like new people in the budget from a year-over-year perspective. It's good to say why. The English language learners, this is a fascinating number. For the last 5 years, we've had a 71% increase in students who do not have English as a first language. And once you cross the 100 number, magic things happen in state law. You have to have an early language learner pack. You have to have a person who's responsible as a lead administrator for the program instead of just having teachers. It's a lot. And so the increase in students means we really have to try to add another person. We're looking at it as a half-time provider and a half-time leader to run the program, which is the sort of thing that's required now. At the moment, we are stipending two of our providers actually, to try to perform the duties of a lead. That's not the most efficient way to do it. That's really not the best.
I'm sorry, can you clarify that? So we're required to have a lead,
Yes.
but this is in your needs-based budget, which is not going to be funded, so we're not going to have something we're required to
We
have?
might have to do what we are doing this year, which is stipend people to perform the duties of a lead, even though that's not really
Where
the
does that
way.
money come from?
Well, we're doing it now. That's part of the rollover. We are stipending 2 people. That's in our level service
So do we
budget.
save that money if we hire this person?
Yeah. A little bit.
It's not
Not enough to pay for it. It's a stipend to 2 people. It's not near the cost of bringing someone on.
Well, then it sounds more efficient to do what we're doing now.
As long as the
Sorry.
state continues to allow it. At some point, they've cited us for what we're doing now and said, you really should have an EL administrator in charge of this. And they haven't come down hard on us yet, but they're letting us be known that we really should be doing it that way.
Thank you.
We put this one on here, one librarian for 2,200 elementary students seems low. I'll just leave it at that. The nursing I mentioned, we currently have 1 nurse at each school, a head nurse, 1 floating nurse who goes around as needs are, and 2 part-time nurses. We'd like to take the 2 part-time nurses who are 2 days a week each and basically add a day and get 1 more full-time nurse. So it's not a big ask in terms of numbers, but it gives us more full-time bodies and more predictable service. It will bring us close to being online with DESI guidance. And the last, well, not quite the last, but secondary offerings, I mentioned the roll-up to middle school and high school. Our current 8th grade is the smallest grade in the school, 276 students. When we look at rolling up next year, we looked at the current 5th grade compared to last year's 5th grade, figured in the number of people who don't usually come up to 6th grade from 5th grade, but it really looks like we're going to have a significant number of students more in Pierce Middle School next year. What's happening now is in the 8th grade, because it's slightly smaller, some of those core teachers are picking up exploratory courses. As the current 7th grade moves up to 8th grade, they won't be able to do that anymore. They're going to have to stick to their core courses. And it will really strain the ability to give those exploratory courses. They'll either get much larger in size or there'll be much more limited availability or, some combination of those. But the middle school principal has said he really needs 2 people to maintain the program that way. Similarly, at the high school, the career tech is an interesting department. It's sort of an et cetera department. It picks up economics, personal finance, computers, culinary studies. It's sort of everything that didn't have a home got put in career tech. And there's a lot of demand for those courses and not very many teachers in the department. And I mean, if this is the number of sections that the principal gave us of courses she could have run had she had, there was the demand for these courses, didn't have the staff for these courses. So these 4 sections of people who wanted personal finance might be in creative writing or something like this because they couldn't get in personal finance. They had to go somewhere else and just had to go to a second choice where we had staff to fulfill it. So we need to look at some of that. PE Health have some of our largest classes, which you generally think of phys ed as not a problem with having 30 students, but when they go into a classroom on the other days to do health classes, and you get 30 to 40 students in a health class, it's not optimal. This was alluded to at the beginning as well. We have a assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction and human resources, which is a 2-headed monster. Those are 2 very different skill sets. And really, at a larger level, there should be an assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction. That's what the assistant superintendent should be. And human resources should be run by an administrator, not at the assistant superintendent level, but by a director of human resources who has that skill set. It's been like this for 25 years that I know of. It just never grew with the system from time when the system was much smaller. And the communications director we mentioned in here too, we have a half-time person right now. But demands on communication, everyone wants a better website than we have, let's be honest. And
We're working on that.
We're working on it, yeah. I was working on it today, in fact, with a vendor. But we do, the demands on communication, the expectations on communication have risen over the last year. Bulk emails to people is not the way to communicate. We need a better communication system. And really, at many places, a web manager, you don't have a web manager, you have a web department for a school of this size. I mean, we are working with one half-time person who's managing all of our communication, which is woefully insufficient. So those are what we put out there. Those are actually in the needs-based request. It's about $1 million, $1.075. The one piece we weren't sure if it's Unit B or Unit A, but you're talking somewhat over $1 million, which was the number that's been tossed around as the needs-based budget for the schools, an extra $1 million. That's the list. So the number that's appearing in the back of the warrant in our favorite Table 9 is in fact is the 68 million, because that's the request, recognizing that you don't ask, you can't get. And maybe if you do ask, you can't get. But we have to ask. It's our due diligence. What next? I mean, we're starting to be asked, well, what, this week when there were testimony at the State House about, for instance, the Chapter 70 formula. The Chapter 70 formula, if you've been reading the Globe, has really nailed a lot of communities this year. 2/3 of the communities are getting nothing but the minimum aid, the $30 a student. From a couple of factors, the Globe article today mentioned one of them, which was the fact that their inflationary increases in their funding formula haven't kept up with real inflationary costs. The other factor is if you made it all the way to the end of the article, which is hard to do sometimes in the Globe, the very last line was sort of a throwaway, but it's actually just as important. The revenue side of the Chapter 70 formula, which is how much communities are expected to be able to spend on schools, the so-called wealth of the town, is a formula that is badly in need of work. It still hasn't been altered since the early 90s. When I saw that we went from a decent increase last year to essentially nothing this year, I looked at that. Last year they used the 2019 aggregate wealth of the town as part of their formula, which is a Department of Revenue number. This year they used the 2021. You will all be amazed and happy to learn that the aggregate wealth of this town went up by 30% in those 2 years. I don't know where. I didn't see it, but maybe I missed it. So certainly that formula leaves something to be desired. And I checked some various communities around, and they were in the 20-25%, sometimes raised to. I didn't see any 30s like ours. But there's certainly something very odd about that formula. And not the least of which is it doesn't take into effect the limits of Proposition 2.5. I mean, when you talk about what is the town supposed to spend on its schools, what can it afford to spend, and you ignore Proposition 2.5, that doesn't make any sense at all, because it is what it is. So we have some hope, based on some of the testimony this week, that they may go back to what they did last year, which was $60 a student as a minimum aid, which would be another $130,000 for the town. We'll see. That being said, I say all that just to say that we all know that the budget's still in flux. Things will happen between now and May. They always do, as the House budget comes out, the Senate budget comes out. So given that, if if money were to become available, if more Chapter 70 were to become available. We've been talking about, we'll come up with a list of what the priorities would be within that needs-based budget, but certainly ones that are calling out to us immediately are some attempt at looking at the reading interventionist, the adjustment counselor, Miller High School teacher, class size. Not to say the others are any less important, but, this is just initial thoughts about what we would be looking at, should funding become available through whatever means between now and then.
What would the timing of that be if it were to happen?
It's hard to say. The House budget will be coming out another couple weeks. We'll see where they put it. Then you'll follow with the Senate budget. You'll never know for sure until the governor signs it. But if House and Senate come to a conference committee on it or come with a similar idea, if House comes out with an increase and Senate says, yeah, we agree with that, you're pretty safe that that's what will go forward. But we just have to watch it. I mean, will they, it's easy to say we want to do it. It's be interesting to see if they think they can afford it. They're all the different pieces. So we'll just watch as we go. But I mean, there are always perturbations in the state budget as it moves from the governor's initial proposal to final approval. So we just keep our eyes on it. And that's where we are.
Indeed, thank you. Questions?
All right, we can go home. Run.
Yeah.
I have a question. So I know a lot of us have been following the meetings. I know that you guys, as a school committee, have said that you would like to see an override. What does that look like? Or are there other, sort of to where Glenn was just talking, are there other options if you were to prioritize positions and saying if X amount of funding were available? Like, do you have I know everything is important and the way, you just outlined some things, but is that the view of the school committee or the view of the school? Or
view of the two of us.
But
the school committee has not looked at this yet.
Just knowing
because
that
we knew it would be asked tonight.
Just knowing where I don't know, you hear from the select board where they are, we're about 6 weeks away from a town meeting. Are there other options that you guys have thought about, or requests, priorities?
I think we're optimistic that ultimately the select board will ultimately make a recommendation that reflects what they've heard from the community and is in the best interest of the schools in town. Of course, we would want all of this funded, and we've gotten overwhelming support from the subcommittee, and I think it'd be great if we put a recommendation in to fully fund our needs-based budget, but we also respect that we're working in a system that we don't have control over. It's ultimately not our call. But I would love the support of anyone who's willing to support the schools. And, the select board has asked that we actually share the needs-based budget with them in preparation for possibly a fall planning for an override. We've heard lots of suggestions, but we're optimistic that ultimately our needs will be met. It just may not be today.
I'm just curious where the advocacy has come from the school committee, though, because this is what needs to happen in order for the select board to believe. It's as much as it's from us. But it's not, though. It's actually it's really the select board that makes that decision, and I think that's yeah. But I'm just curious, have you guys, besides going that one time Lizzie went, have you guys got on the agenda to advocate for this needs budget?
We've been meeting with the select board publicly, the finance subcommittee, for months. So the needs-based budget was presented in December, and they're very much aware of it. But the board does get to make a recommendation, and I very much appreciate that. But it's not for lack of the warrant and the select board having knowledge and being very clear that we would like to have the needs-based budget funded.
But, so are we asking our Milton public school parents to wait for another year for the needs that they have so that their kids can be successful? Because those, I'm not done, they need those middle school teachers to fulfill the teams. So to me, it'd be more, I didn't hear them say that at the subcommittee and on the meetings that they've had when they voted last night. No comments. So I'm just curious why these important positions that will allow our kids to be successful are being not prioritized by the select board. And I didn't hear anything on the meetings about them. So I'm just curious why there's lack of advocacy for that.
I don't think it's been a lack of advocacy, as I mentioned before. I appreciate the fact that people go to those meetings. I apologize, I was out of town. Lizzie did go to a select board meeting. We had community members there, but we can't make anyone pick up a mic. We have received emails from parents. We received one today.
Yeah, I read it.
Advocating. And the point is, we need an entire community of support. The Warrant Committee, the Select Board, and the general public to support the schools. What we can do is present the budget, and Glenn shared that at the last subcommittee meeting with the Warrant Committee, that in fact, it's our obligation to present it and to make the case. But that's it. Like, we're not allowed to campaign.
But I've seen campaigning. We've all seen campaigning from the school committee for the MBTA funding that the schools were losing.
Also, let her finish. Let her finish.
I'm just responding to that we have seen it.
Just let her finish. It's okay.
When we were first elected, and we talked about override campaigns, Glenn was one of the first people to say to me, that's not something that school committee members can do. We can ask people to attend meetings, which we have. We've attended meetings. We've answered your questions. You asked questions about overrides, about pilot. I would love to say that we were in a position to do that, but we're not. But we would appreciate advocacy on behalf of the Warrant Committee in support of the budget. Some years in the past we've had it and sometimes not. But today, I would love to know, like I know we asked for questions, I'd love to know your response to the needs-based budget, and if you'd like to share with the rest of the committee what you thought, having previewed all of this content and asked Glenn questions. I believe you've met with the superintendent. What do you think of the ask that we have here?
Can I take a stab at that as chairman of the Warrant Committee, such as I am? From some of the conversations that I've had with other Warrant Committee members with regards to the budget process that we're in now, I think we're surprised that we're not doing an override. We had expected, I believe that I had put in, my statement that I make in the warrant, at least this last year, that we fully expected the town to be ready for an override because of all the use of one-time funds in the last budget, et cetera, sort of saying, get ready. I think in our comment with regards to the school budget, there's more of a sort of get ready, here it comes warning, if you will. Like, there's just things that we have to look at. I think we've made statements like because we expected to have one last year. I think we were saying get ready. We're definitely going to have one. I think personally, one of the reasons why I volunteered for another year on the Warrant Committee was that we saw MBTA and an override. Is that we expected in this iteration to really be taking on tremendous tasks. So,
thank you. I actually appreciate that.
Right. So I think that we had been expecting. Now, such is the nature of things. Like Beverly, you had been laying out the for us to advocate. You were talking about how you're aware of the role that you play on the school committee. We're aware of the role that we play on the Warrant committee. In fact, I had an opportunity to do some research of exactly what the limits, the extreme limits of our mandate as the Warrant committee with regards to advocating for an override. And at the end of the day, it really does look like the select board has ultimate authority with regard to budget or not budget override, because they are expressly, and in the statute, it's underlined that they are the only body that can actually put it on the ballot, because that's the key, is a Proposition 2.5 budget override is up to the people at a town-wide ballot. So we make our recommendation, everybody makes their recommendation, but at the end of the day, it's up to the townspeople to decide. And the select board is the only body. So we can make our recommendations. I don't think that the school committee and the administration could have been any more clear than they were. I watched the chair of the school committee go to public speak to get 3 whole minutes. To me, that was, I don't want to say desperation, but that's using every available tool to get the message out. So as far as, Allison, I sense frustration that, this is where we're at. And so, what can we do as the Warrant Committee? I mean, we can make recommendations. And so, we can make recommendations. Jay has identified one possibility of a recommendation that we can make. Otherwise, we have to go to Chase Berkeley and ask for his wood chipper back, right? Otherwise we have to make, recommendations of, Peter to Paul and all that. So,
So is that so that's the process by which something can happen. It's not like saying, to your point, it's not saying that we could recommend an override per se. We could say do you know what, are you saying you support the needs-based budget of the school committee, but then what does that, but then there has to be funding for it. Do you know what?
Right, for us to make, for us, because we start to really get into the realm of the theoretical, right, which our town seems to be doing a lot of recently, right, of these, of how, how does the Warrant Committee get in there and convince the town at town meeting to sort of on their own rise up for a budget override because they are just raring to go, right, for that. So it's theoretically possible that we could do it, but as a practical matter, let's say we wanted to give schools approximately 1.07. 1.07.
Plus health insurance.
That's not out of our budget.
Right.
But the money has to be there.
But we have to pay for it.
Right. But let's say that we decided we're gonna take it upon, so with the tools that we have available to us, with our requirement now is the requirement that's come via the select board, which is a balanced budget, is that we would have to find the 1.07 somewhere. So we could talk health insurance. We could go repossess Chase Berkeley's chipper. We could go look at all the, look every little here and there throughout the entire budget, make recommendations, but then at the end of the day, we have to go to the town meeting and say, this is our recommendation, and then they get to decide, article by article by article, what do they want to do?
Because you would be recommending a reduction theoretically in each of the articles.
Somewhere
to capture that money.
Yes, because it has to zero out.
Right.
Because it's a balance sheet. this column has to match that column, big 0 at the bottom. And so as far as the theoretically possible, that's a lot more theoretically possible that we could make those recommendations.
Right.
Like to some degree, we've done a little bit of that in the past, where Amy Dexter is here, and we're able to kind of move things around a little bit, but nothing on the order of 1.07.
I guess that's why I was asking, the second question was, if 1.07 is a big number, which it is, and there were, I guess that's where the priority question comes in. Like, are there things prioritized that if it came back and we're like, okay, we could recommend finding a big number, $300,000, are there, because ultimately the budget is the budget and you guys spend how you spend it, but like if that were something, is there a priority list that then you could say?
It would be at that point.
at that point.
We're not there yet.
Right, but if that's something that, and, obviously we'd have to talk about it as a committee, but if that was something and that we said, all right, you propose Jay's thing, you take the wood chipper, you go for whatever else there is, and recommend that. But
Right.
That's an alternative. That's an option. If that's the way if it's about a level budget.
Right. So the question, if the question is how do we get the 1.07 for needs-based 2 schools, it would be all of the above, and then we'll look forward to having those departments come and give us their budget.
Can I ask a clarifying question too?
Yes, sure.
So we would still need an override, so there's a fall override, and then we would have to do an override for operating because we're at a deficit just so I'm aware. So we'll have to do an override.
That's what we said the last 2 years.
Because I don't think, unless we have another free cash moment. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. We still are going to need it because we're deficit. So just so I understand. So we're going to do a fall override, but we'll still need a possible spring override.
The way I kind of look at it is like this, is that Proposition 2.5 locks us into this 2.5. I don't care what they say. The government's lying to us. Inflation runs at least 10, 11, 12% a year, which means that just to keep up with basic inflation, the town has to do an override on a fairly regular basis. And so then what you do is, like Nick said, is when it's time to do one, because it takes a certain amount of political capital to get it through town meeting. You get your political capital all revved up, and then you come up with a number that can hopefully give you some momentum to get through the next couple of years. Okay? And so we kind of felt, I think I don't speak just for myself when I say we felt we were at that point where it was time to load up and gear up and get in and get a number. And I think I have a pretty big number in my head. But I've let others share their number first but anyway, I think I have a big number in my head. So I think that's just sort of how it's set up, is every now and then, right, are we running at a deficit or are we running out of steam from the last override? I think Mr. Milano is just sort of holding this thing together with the last little bit of momentum that we had. And he can defend his budget. And I think he did a good job of it.
And he mentioned the needs from the needs 1.8 million from other departments, which they haven't even detailed the way the schools have here.
Right.
So just keeping that in mind, that, we wouldn't be going for an override as a town solely for the school's needs. It would always have to be to meet the needs of all the departments.
And that's a good point thank you for bringing it up, because it also goes to sort of like a basic fairness issue, is that the school department is not the only department that is sitting on the needs base that's not being required, and that everybody has their needs base that in many cases has been deferred for years and years. So and that's again why I think, in my mind, I have a big number, because we have, some of these departments have been, I think schools has benefited from being prioritized because of the children, right? And it's right and just that it should be so. So there's some, needs based that have been sitting there for years and years, and some of the other departments are able to get things in the capital improvement. They're able to sort of get things through there, but it's time. So, I mean, as if anybody listens to us anyway, but the best that we can do sometimes, and I could probably just push rewind and play if people push rewind and play anymore, of my speech from last year, of where I get up at we're telling you we're going to do an override next year, we're going to need it, but then we see, so.
This town has never gone 8 years without an override since Proposition 2.5 came in. The last one 8 years ago was, what, $3.8 million or something like that, as I recall. So, do the math. It's a big number.
And the federal government really helped that.
Yeah, it was ESSER and ARPA that the reason we're here, and we weren't here 3 years ago.
Yeah. So to quote the great man, I feel your pain.
But you said you're going to move things around for us, and I really appreciate it.
That's what I heard too.
I'll come back for that meeting.
Yeah, right.
She'll hit rewind it.
Right.
Over and over again.
Judy.
Thank you, Dave. Just to clarify, when I asked Nick if he balanced the budget with the inclusion of the number of the school department, he said yes. So we approved the entire budget, which would include the number for the school department. That's the end of it for town meeting in May. However, from what I'm understanding, the town itself, not just the school department or the DPW or any other department, the town itself will decide whether to ask for an override that's inclusive of all departmental operational needs. Is that correct?
No.
Can someone help me?
No, the town won't decide that.
What do you mean by the school budget?
The select board decided not to.
Yeah.
They're doing the balanced budget, not including the 2.9 that's the above services that we needed. So the select board decided not to. So the town won't decide that.
How will that number change on Nick's budget that he gives us? It'll be minus that 2.9?
It just won't be there.
It's already
not in it. It's not in it.
It's not in it currently. The budget that's been presented is a balanced budget, so it doesn't, level budget, level service, sorry, I always use the wrong words. It's a level service budget, so it's not including needs-based, so there is no taking out or putting in.
It's just the number that is until such future time that the town decides to do an overall override that could benefit all departments.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. Right, essentially.
It sounds right. It's just a number, it's just a requirement that's not met. So we go with Nick has proposed a budget that's what was it, the overall needs was 2.7 less than what was asked for by all departments?
2.9.
2.9. So that all the departments put in their needs-based request that was approximately $2.9 million more than the budget could support. So their recommendation is we're going to support at the level that we can, and the 2.9 will not be met as part of this budget. So I don't know what happens to that number, Judy. That number just sort of
stays for the next one.
It just goes into the ether because we'll get a new number in the next budget cycle. So the next budget cycle, there will be the requests, and then there will be a new needs-based number. So the 2.9 is where we would start with an override if we did one now. Because if we did one now, we would start with the 2.9, and then we would think out 3, 4, 5, go back to all the departments and say, what would you need over the next 3, 4, 5 on top of what we would expect year over year to be, which gets tricky. And then probably add a couple cool million in there just to be safe.
Just a quick note.
Go ahead, Jay.
Okay. You said we'd start with the 2.9. I was recently looking at the 2017 override, and the Warrant Committee said, we got a lot of requests. We're not funding all of these requests with the override. So we might not start with 2.9. We might say this and that.
Fair enough.
But you will start with the 2.5 that we will carry over for next year. Just
2.5 or
that's what he said. No, the 2.5. 2.5.
I thought it was 2.5 last year, but 1.5 this year, which is why I said we're doing better than last year.
That's what. Yeah, I think that's what I had. 2.5. 2.5. Yeah, when he cleared. Yeah. But just so we're on the same. So. We would have to start with that 2.5. But just so we're on the same page, the priority would be that they put the school building in first as an override in the fall.
Not an override, it's the debt exclusion.
The debt exclusion. Okay.
Feels like an override.
It does.
It feels like one.
We're going to be paying for it.
That's their call. And they may or may not.
Maybe they won't.
I appreciate your support. But the last time we met, I felt as though there was support for the new school building.
I don't know what the question was. Or the statement was.
My point was.
Is your hand up?
I felt from the last subcommittee meeting that there was support for the school building.
I wasn't part of that conversation. So I don't.
No, the Warrant Committee?
We did not give a school building committee recommendation.
No, I wouldn't say school building. I would say the school.
We didn't talk about that.
The
land swap.
The 1.1. Yeah, I mean, I was definitely all about the positions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tim.
Yeah.
So I didn't hear anything about residency with your budget. I get calls from people all the time saying there's kids in district that aren't from here. When's the last time there was a 100% audit done on residency? As per your JFLA residency policy, you, Dr. Burrows, can trip a call for everyone to reestablish residency for the whole town that's in the school system. And if you guys find based at 16K kid, 62 kids, there's your 1.07 million. And the base at 18K, it's 55 kids. I'm not saying there are, but have you guys looked at that? And is there a backlog?
So we've been meeting with the registrar, and part of what we've been doing over the last probably 3 or 4 months is review all of our policies. So we're in a policy review right now. If you've been watching our school committee meetings, we actually are covering a lot of ground on policies. Our Director of Student Services, who oversees the registrar, is working directly with the registrar. We're currently doing research and looking at that policy to see if that is up to speed with some of the needs that we're facing and some of what you're suggesting. So we are looking at, BPS, we're looking at all the districts that are in a similar situation with policies to see how can we be as effective as possible. We do. When we hear about anything, we follow up. You see the policy in terms of what the requirements are
It's
currently.
lacking compared to other towns. I've called other towns, spoke to other towns. It's severely lacking.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about $1 million and just say there's 60 kids, there's your budget gap. Right there. You don't have to do anything. And if they've been there for multiple years, you can actually go back after the families and claw the money back by state law.
Yeah.
And the other question is, how many kids have moved out of town and have permission to finish the school year?
Yeah, but I don't have a number in terms of, I mean, seniors, I believe, are in the policy, correct?
Seniors in high school, if they move out, are allowed to finish the year
By special permission.
by special permission.
Yeah.
No one else is.
But would you commit to doing a full audit?
I mean, I think we're committed to looking at our policy in total and revising it to make it as effective as possible.
Not what I asked. Not to be rude, but it's not what I asked.
Okay. Is this related to the budget?
Yes, it is, because there's $1 million budget gap, and if you find 55 kids, there's your budget gap. It's gone,
So we do check residency at the time of transitions and entry.
which I think is not enough, because people can have a landlord sign they're here and leave, and you guys never follow up until either 6th grade or 9th grade.
Yeah.
So they could be here from kindergarten to 6th grade and not live in the town.
But I think just in terms of Dr. Burrows' point about the pragmatism of, are we in the business of educating students or verifying residency? We created a policy that reflects what makes sense for this.
I'm talking about fiduciary responsibility.
Let her finish, Deb.
I simply want to make the point that the core function of schools is not to audit residency. We confirm residency at time of entry and major transitions. In the absence of looking at other districts, which we're in the process of doing now, are we saying that we want to commit additional resources for an audit to find 5 students? Or are we saying as a town that we support our schools, we support a new building, we support the budget? I personally don't know the value of auditing 4,000 students every single year looking for nickels when the millions are not being paid in terms of pilot and other opportunities for revenue. I'm not speaking on behalf of the school committee, I'm speaking on behalf of myself. I have an audit every year in my organization. And one of the caveats in the back of the audit was, we're not looking at every transaction because you don't pay us enough to do that. They're looking to see whether or not we're in compliance with our policy. And I think the scale and scope of what we do reflects our capacity and the fact that our core function isn't an audit of residency. We need money for reading specialists, right? Interventionists. We're looking for a librarian, and we're looking for your support.
Don't have mine.
Okay,
I have,
all right.
but I was like,
Time out. I'm going to jump in on this one. Thank you for that. The role of the Warrant Committee is an interesting one. In some towns, we would be a finance committee. Our role here is a little different because we take on a lot of, we are involved in a lot of projects that are beyond that. But one of our core functions is that we are in an audit and oversight facility. We go through line item, line by line in budgets, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe it's true and maybe it's not true. Maybe it's true that your core function is to educate the children and that the auditing of the residency as a right is secondary or not that. That being said, is that from a town budget perspective, the role of the school would be to educate the children who live in this town, not necessarily to educate children who do not live in this town.
I agree.
And it's kind of like that song, Everybody Knows. Everybody knows that there's a lot of kids in the schools who do not live in this town. Such is the nature of things in Milton. It's always been that way. There's a sense, at least anecdotally, if you talk to the kids in the school, they'll tell you who they are. They know who doesn't live in this town. They just know. Everybody knows. So something has to be done, right?
Yep.
Something has to be done. And to hear like, well, that's not the role of the school.
Can I also point out that there are nuanced cases?
Sure.
Where, there was a case actually that I learned about last year where it's true that the student themselves were not sleeping in Milton. They were not living in Milton in that particular moment. But that was used as an example of like, here's a kid, getting away with being educated in Milton. The reality was that child was all of a sudden homeless.
Sure.
And we are actually, by law, responsible for still educating that child while their situation is being resolved.
Absolutely. There's
So while I
exception
think
to every rule.
sometimes we might think that, it's all of these folks getting away with not living here, perhaps that end is not as big as we think, because there are a lot of situations that we may not know about. So I do think that by looking at our policy, we can perhaps do more regular audits, as you're calling them, of just confirming residency for sure, and that could create, additional resources that we don't know about. However, I think we approach it from the perspective of the child is in the school, we need to educate them, and this is what it's going to take. That's the primary lens that we use. But I do hear what you're saying, and that's where the policy revision is so important, to make sure that we have a strong enough policy and that then we're implementing the policy as written.
And on your point, I don't think you're right, Tim, that there's an exception to a rule. No, that's the rule, because a child who is homeless, who has no home,
by law has to be.
Then Milton is their home.
It's a law.
Right. So so a child who's homeless is a different story.
There are also like children with divorced parents.
Sure.
And one lives in Milton and one lives in Boston.
Sure.
And they travel back and forth, and maybe you hear about that child got dropped off from Mattapan because, anyway, so I would like to let Dr. Pavlicek I know people have other comments, but
We did meet. I just wanted to we did meet.
Yeah.
Lori and I met with Dr. Burrows and Pavlicek too. And so I do want to give kind of what I took from that is that there is a lack of understanding of numbers of how many kids are on POCs and landlord agreements that are not followed up with the next year, because we don't do a yearly. So that to me is a red flag of some of the policies that need to be changed, because to many points there's entries at kindergarten and entries at sixth grade. We're not talking about the exceptions to the rule of homelessness and divorced parents. We are talking about really understanding the property owner certifications, and that those agreements expire, and that we don't do a yearly follow-up next year because they are now in the school system. So to me, those are red flags of what we are, and we didn't even know the numbers, and that's why I wanted to meet with Serena, who is the residency, who wasn't able to sit down, or what we weren't allowed to, because commitment to you guys was we speak through you. But to me, that was a little bit of a red flag too, of why we are not being open. And there's nothing wrong with being open, but we're talking about money that we're missing for our kids' education, that if it's necessary to do these kind of things to help so that we can get teachers for our middle school, I think it's something budget-wise we really need to focus on. And I wanted to do a pilot program last year, and it was looked down upon. And I'm not saying we have to do all the students, but what we are noticing is that there is somebody doing it halftime with registration, those the double positions that you guys talk about with curriculum and HR, it's just like, when you look at other towns, they at least have 2. And we have one working half-time. So like, to me, these are all red flags of things to get us where we need to be budget-wise, which is part of what we're focused on in this group.
The recommendation was to audit every student to ensure their residence was, if that was incorrect.
For a baseline. And I would volunteer time to come and do it myself. I don't have a problem doing that. That's how much I believe we have a problem.
Mr. Pavlicek, or
Either one.
either,
So, a couple acronyms. POC is, we have 2 different things. Certainly, when people own their own house, proving residency is generally not a hard thing to do. But you do have people who are either renting, or living with family. And living with family is the biggest movement lately. And in either of those cases, they signed an agreement, either the landlord or the owner of the house, that says these people live here, we have it notarized, and they understand that if they're obligated to tell us if they move out, and they are on the hook for tuition if they don't tell us. And this is a notarized agreement either with the landlord or with the family they're living with. Now, to Allison's point is reasonable. How often do you audit those, in the case of POCs, 150 families who are living with relatives in Milton? And that's sort of the thing we're looking at. We were looking at, actually, we were talking this morning about the Boston policy, because our residency person is in constant contact with Boston. You may not think a lot of people are trying to get into Boston, but actually they are for the exam schools, for the art schools, and things like that. It's in certain places where they're looking at the same situation we're looking at. And it turns out that if you look at their policy, there's a lot more in it than ours, but actually what they write is what we do, which is one of the reasons why we have to look at our policies, because our policies don't necessarily reflect all the things we do. But to your point about auditing, picking out the POCs, these living with family on a regular basis, that is something we do need to look at. We do send out, people sometimes wonder why we send out some things in the mail, like who your teacher is for the beginning of the year, because we put return address, we put a do not forward on it, and if it comes back to us, they get a residency renewal check. And those are the sorts of things. If someone reports to us that this child isn't living here, we start up residency again. And it's important to do. We've done 90-something checks, I think she said today, this year so far, involving residency that are off-cycle, not rising 6th, not rising 9th, not kindergarten, pre-K. So it does happen. Could it be better? Sure, of course, anything could be better, and we can work on getting it better. But I don't want to leave here thinking that it isn't happening. There's no system on earth that can't be improved. So I think that's part of it.
Just add relative to the staffing piece and how much staffing we have as we look at our policy and look at best practice across, at least the metro area to see what other people are doing. If we need more staffing, we will look at that and we'll flex and
We said last year, though, that it was a full-time, just so you know. It was, we talked about it being a full-time last year.
Okay.
But you guys require a physical every year, right?
No.
You need to submit your health forms.
Health form?
No, they're not every year, though. I just got.
You have to submit your health forms every year.
Okay.
No, but I'm just saying, if you have to do one, what's the difficulty of one piece of paper?
I think this concern has been raised by the Warrant Committee. So I would ask if we have more questions from us, if it's kind of already been, it's okay. If it's already been. Is there anything else? Is this budget, right? This is budget related, but this is not the focus of our meeting here tonight. Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions?
I have one.
Tim.
Regina Watts. I don't see her on the budget. Is she a temporary contract?
Yeah, just through the end of this academic year.
Okay, thank you.
Who's she?
She's
administrative liaison at Tucker right now.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Jay.
I guess following up on sort of what my colleague here was saying earlier, you want $1 million plus health insurance. Maybe I'm a pessimist. I don't know if we're going to find that for you, but we all have our little subcommittee assignments, and I'm scouring mine and seeing if I can save 50,000 here or 20,000 there.
Yep.
And what I'm hearing is maybe you don't have this for us now, but is there a number where you say, we want $1 million, we want whatever, 13 FTEs, I don't know what it is. But if we got 4 FTEs, we'd be in a much better place. 4 employees, we'd be in a better place. 3 employees, we'd be in a much better place. Maybe you're not ready to tell us that now, but if we're going through our budgets, trying to find 50,000 here, 20,000 there, knowing that if the school could only hire 3 people, that would make a world of difference. I don't know, maybe I'm dreaming, but it'd be nice to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I had, I mean, I don't want to go too low and then shoot.
Right.
I mean, I think $400,000 would be great.
Or more.
You know,
Right.
Were you listening over there? It's okay if you were.
4 to 5 positions. You know, depending on what those positions are. 4 to 5 positions, you know, I mean, Glenn put it on the last slide.
You know.
We've talked about this. Interventionist to complete, you know, not starting intervention to 3rd grade and then not having intervention is quixotic at best, right? I think secondly, the middle school and positions at the middle school, and whether that's, you know, the elective, adding exploratory opportunities for students, or we currently have a half team. So looking at completing that half team. So that's the other place, and then finally, what was the third? Adjustment, yeah. Adjustment counselors. We have a number in our needs-based budget. We're going to look at that holistically across the district and potentially, you know, if we could add 1 position, we would probably make that a district-wide position, and that position would float and provide support at a number of buildings, wouldn't just sit in one building.
I feel in the library.
Yeah.
That you asked.
I mean, this is something, so our subcommittee, if you were to keep track of this, because this is the kind of thing that could be part of our discussion down the road when we're making votes on articles to give a recommendation to. Because maybe it's true, like maybe Jay, whatever committees he's at, identifies, you know, a little bit, and then that's something we could potentially, right?
But on the downer side, if we were to scrape together some money, we've got requests from, not counting schools, we've got requests from 15 different departments.
Yes, sir.
So if we scrape together some money, does all of it go to the schools? Does half of it go to schools?
Right? Because the cemetery subcommittee might come and say, hey, Lisa Ahern, she's got her wish, right? So,
I do respect that.
yeah, that's what it is.
Questions and answers.
Yeah, such is the nature. Right.
Thank you for your
That we do it for the power.
Thank you for your
Can I just ask one more?
Oh, Tom, I'm sorry.
So, you know, I just have a question. It looks like you need help. No, I'm serious. It's like that. It's important. Librarians. But is it fair for me just to, because I kind of came into the Warrant Committee process with an idea of overrides, now not overrides. I'm hearing, so I kind of have this game plan. I'm going to fail the test because I'm not ready for it now. But now I'm also in collaboration. So I saw the vote. As to your supplemental request of 1.075, is the Select Board unequivocally not supporting that?
I know you should ask them.
With a 5-0 vote not to fund you $1.075 million. Is that inaccurate for me to go into the process here?
Their vote was to recommend the level service budget and not the 1.075 or any of the requests from the other departments. And that was their recommendation.
Right, because they would vote against the whole thing. So I don't think we can characterize as singling out schools.
Well,
I'm asking it in
You're trying to get them to do it.
No, but I just need to clarify in my head the importance of these, and if I have a select board
It's the
saying,
majority of the budget.
don't do it, right, that weighs on me, I think, in trying to figure it out. And I read that 5-0 vote as no, or they're playing politics.
And I think
So,
it's, weeks ago, they hadn't yet balanced the budget for
Yeah.
level service. So it's all a process, I mean, there was a message to the schools.
To cut.
I can't keep track of time, but it was.
Cut about
I think it was in early February that, we were to cut $500,000.
okay.
As they continued to work, as you saw Nick,
Right.
trying to piece together the various elements that gets us through another year without the override, that brought them to the level service, so that they came back and said, okay, you don't have to make the cuts, we can give you the level service. So it's in that context, I guess.
Oh, I understand that. I just wanted that to be clear. just for my thought.
And also, to all of your points, if there's opportunities to meet the needs of the schools and other town departments creatively, I think we'd all be appreciative. Like, I don't think this is a zero-sum game, because it's not just us. And I don't want fire and police or any of the other departments to say, what about us, right? This is all of us. And I appreciate all of your support. I appreciate the committee that met with us for several weeks to go through the budget in detail. I know your job is hard. It's been hard every year I've sat in this room, but I appreciate the fact that you come back and do it anyway. So, thank you.
And I just also want to clarify in terms of requests for meeting with employees, like the school committee also can't do that. So the school committee can't ask to talk with the registrar, talk with someone else. Those always come through the superintendent. So we're not hiding anything. There's nothing,
And that is per policy.
So
I didn't want the school committee there. I don't need them there. I mean,
no, I'm not. I knew you didn't want the school committee.
Jay.
I've got a bit of a hostile question.
Uh-oh.
All right. Are you ready?
Go for it.
So last year, I believe your needs-based request was you had 12 different needs-based requests. And the town budget funded 7 of them, including 3 new special ed teachers, an elementary math interventionist, and a middle school English teacher. And yes, I'm looking at my computer because yes, I have slides on this, but I'm sparing you that. Of the things that you asked for last year that you didn't get, as far as I can tell, it's only 2 people. It's a Milton High School business teacher and a Pierce teacher. So
And the needs-based this year.
they're in the needs-based. 2 people were in the needs-based last year that were not funded.
And now there's double
Yeah.
in each. There's 2 in the high school and 2 in the middle school.
Yep.
Right, so you're right.
So, do you want to address that? That we, the town, someone, met over half your requests last year, and all but 2 of the things you're asking for this year were not requested last year.
One thing is they were not formally requested last year.
Okay.
They were discussed and they were pared down because last year we
prioritized.
We did prioritize, and so if you go back, like the HR director, that was a conversation we had last year. So I think the year
before,
the needs that we presented last year were much more. They were whittled down. And they have only continued to compound, which has made them rise to the priority list for this year, if that makes sense. But so just because they were not formally presented within the, that needs-based budget last year, they were needs that had been identified through the budget process that we had last year.
And prioritized off the list, essentially, so we wouldn't ask for everything.
Correct, and this time we decided to take a very different approach to the budgeting. Let's just put it out there. It's what we need.
Okay.
Can I piggyback off Jay? So like if this is like 2 or 3 years of the same request for like HR, like I guess it comes down to, and I mentioned this on Monday's meeting, it's like we keep adding positions, but like, I'm just wondering when we start budgeting, like, for these positions, where we go through and we sit down and this, you can talk more about this, but we talked about it. But it's like, we're putting all these positions on the wall and we just keep adding positions rather than, like, in my experience of budgeting, which I did for years, you go through and you're like, okay, this isn't working, we collaborate these positions. Like, I have a few years of doing this, and I've yet to kind of see that. So I'm like wondering, now I'm assuming with you coming on that will change, but I just have a hard time not understanding, like, how again this year we're like, okay, we know we need these, and we're on like another year of asking for them, and like we didn't get it the last few years. It's like, where is the budgeting process?
So can I answer, do you want?
I think
I could talk about the historical piece, about the HR piece, but you can.
Sure. Well, I mean, I would just say that, thinking about the context of building the system, I would say most school districts run in the framework that you just talked about, which is every year you add positions, you have increasing need, right? I mean, I see that across the country in school systems. So you keep adding positions, but you don't go back to the positions you have and restructure because it is so challenging to do. And it takes a lot of concerted effort on the part of the entire system to come together. So it's not just one person coming in with a great idea and then just starting to shift things. Those kinds of leaders don't last very long in systems. You have to work with everybody in the system to help them understand and then make the moves. And you're not going to get everybody with you, but you can get a large chunk. And that's kind of what I was referring to in terms of the work I'm doing this year to set up what I think I was mentioning next year's budget, I think, is more impactful in terms of some of those structures that we haven't had time yet to build in. I've had 6 months, and a lot of it has been just figuring out what's going on, right? So that is work that we will continue to do. The big shifts in this budget cycle, we're bringing the team together, not throwing the spaghetti against the wall in terms of like, we're going to ask for 100 positions, and then we're going to tailor it down. Okay, now we got 90, now we got 80. What survives? That values activity you do, where you start with 10, and then you try to find, like, have you ever done that? Leadership training.
And it's okay. No.
Maybe I'll go to your leadership.
So it sounds, Doctor, that you're kind of setting up a situation where like phase 3 of your 3-part plan sort of lands next year.
It lands at the end of this year and then builds into budget.
So
and budget development happens in the fall.
So if that landed about the same time as a big budget override landed, that could help fund that vision. Something to keep in mind. Warrant
I
committee.
can't say I followed that.
It's okay. We'll just let that sit.
I'll watch the tape.
Rewind.
The concern I only have with that is that the priorities from what you have our kids are needing them now.
Right.
So like,
And we're
that's-
moving things now and are continuing as we move through this current year with the level service that we do have. We are working to fill and shift and adapt. So
Sure.
if we need to, we are doing that. And
Yeah,
we're having these conversations with, Principal Fish and other people that are, problem solving now. We don't know where we're going to land, but we're problem solving now to know, are there any shifts we need to be thinking about district-wide or internally within a building to support need?
To follow up, I think the focus, for the interventionists and stuff like that, those kids coming off of COVID and just really, they can't wait another year. So we have to figure out as a group, and for these middle school teachers that are going to have classrooms even bigger, which is another issue, now I'm glad to hear about the Cunningham, but it's like, when in that vision needs to be like Glover or Pierce, because what is the backup plan? You know, and that's the thing that we need to understand as a group, and yet like we've been reactive and that's like where like I, like, you know, even myself can be, but we have to literally like understand that even Cunningham will be 2025. We have nothing in the woodworks for Glover, and when we talk about equity, it's like we're putting the classrooms at Cunningham. We need to look at Glover, we need to look at Pierce, because we can't get to no funding possibly for the school and then have nothing in place. And then it's all these components that I think that's what frustrates, you know, so like budgeting and me looking at, you know, the kids who need these resources now, and the advocacy of planning and doing all that. So that's what I think needs to come to from these discussions budget-wise, but Glover and those of our options that were done in 2019, and when we talk about those should have been in the woodworks as well as looking at this new school. Thank you.
And can I just piggyback on that? I think especially with like reading interventions, some of these multi-tiered supports, because if they're not addressed, then it ends up being addressed in a different way. Like, do kids end up going, okay, we don't have the services, so then it's more expensive, so now they're going out of district because we don't have the interventions for them, or the reading support, or the mental health support, or those things. So I think it becomes an exponentially more expensive issue the longer it goes, because those interventions aren't happening. And so I know that you guys are working on them, but I think I would argue that those pieces, because they have such a big impact, I think maybe number-wise, they're not as big as like the middle school teachers. It's not impacting the same number of kids. But I think because it's been held back and because they can be longer-term, that the impact grows for these kids. I think that's what makes that page just so important. If we can find a way to do part of it even.
Thank you. Any questions from the Warrant Committee? Do our guests have any questions for us? Is there a question that you wish that we had asked that we didn't?
I actually ask that at the end of a reference check every time, because there's something I should have asked that I didn't, so it's a good question.
All right.
We ask the questions.
Oh, okay, you're right. Yes, sir. That's right. Yes.
Have a good night.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again. Thank you so much.
I like that you roll on double bubble.
Would you like some? We got enough for everybody. We got enough for everybody.
Springtime, baseball time.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, Warrant Committee. Would we like to have any discussion of anything that we've talked about tonight? Are there any hands up on Zoom? Okay. Jay.
I threw out a possibility earlier. Maybe I've caught people off guard. Maybe they're not ready to express an opinion about it. Do we want to maybe ask Mr. Milano, if you did another premium holiday, then how would you allocate it among because we could say, let's take everybody and put it in the schools, but maybe Mr. Milano would have a more nuanced view of 2/3 in the school.
Yeah. My sense is one way that we should think about doing it would be like at some point, or when we're really starting to get together on our budget, we have just a general discussion about where are we at.
Where are we going to print?
So.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, that's true. So we've basically got 2 weeks. So I'm lining up next Monday and Wednesday. We'll get agendas out. Next Monday and Wednesday, we're going to have, right now, we've got scheduled all the departments that we usually hear from except for police and fire. because we're still working on the citizens petition with regards to the speed trap on Chickatawit. So I might want to schedule police at the same time that we deal with that. So next week, we've got everybody coming in but police and fire on Monday and Wednesday. Then that gives us the following week. I think we should get ready for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then it's my understanding from talking with Mr. Milano, like that on their end, the warrant itself is pretty much drafted and ready to go. We just have to plug in our recommendations. So then if we have a general discussion about where we see all this going, like a big question that we need to answer, like is going to be, are we going to want to start freeing up money from, you know what I mean? Are we going to, as our general sense, where are we at on, let's just call it next budget, as is? Like in the past, the warrant committee has just gone with it. In a general sense, say this is where we're at. If we want to talk about finding money, moving money around, then we're definitely going to want to look into your options with regards to the healthcare money, because that's a place that we could find some money potentially. Then I think we definitely want to bring Nick in and see, where are we at on that?
Do you anticipate the other departments sharing their needs-based as well? I mean,
oh yeah,
partly they have, but I
mean, they do. Everybody comes in with their needs-based, and so we'll hear it.
And do we ask similar questions?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's very, it's straightforward. Like we always hear about, the dump truck. It's old. It's gonna go, but we can put it off. Like this, like the underground fuel tanks at the cemetery, or there's just all those things come, right? And so we'll hear, and so then that's part of the larger, conversation too. Like, are we gonna, so people who are talking to the departments, like, have that on your radar screen. If
Yeah, I guess I'm feeling a little grouchy tonight. So we're 2 weeks away from the warrant going to print, give or take. So if next week our meetings are having these people come in, people can talk for a long time about their departments. And I'm a little worried that, Department X comes in and talks for 2 hours, then Department Y walks up and talks just for 2 hours. 7 + 4 is 11, then it's 11 p.m. We're punch drunk, all we can do is go home. I don't know if that's the best use of our next week, if we ask them to keep it to 30 minutes.
Fine, I'm sure. We can ask them to keep it short. I mean, some of them are pretty short. Like, they really can be. And then there's usually like a big night where we go through with Nick, like all of the, like once we sort of come down to the basic budget. Like if a lot of things go basically year over year, like the stormwater, right?
Yeah.
Like all of those, like it is what it is, and we will get through it. So like, my sense of like going to print is we have always been really good at meeting the deadline that we are given. There seems to be some like secret, actual, real deadline.
The real one is what you're saying.
Right? So I think that we can meet like the deadline that we are given. I think we have enough time to do it.
I think if we approve Nick's budget chapter and verse, we can. If we want to make any changes, things will slow down.
Yeah, they will.
So I don't have a sense of the room. I don't know if we're going to get a sense.
No PowerPoints.
Please.
I'm not.
Please.
What do we want to bring PowerPoint?
Do we want to get a sense of the room? I mean, this is where we're at. Where we're at is like the budget is where the budget is. Like, I think that if anybody wants to like put up the red flag of mutiny and try to figure out if there's a way for us to jam an override through, town meeting, right? I don't think that's really an option. So I think unless anybody speaks out strenuously that it's time to take the ship, I think we're talking about year over year. The question just is, are we going to try to move money around in that budget?
Nick didn't seem too open to that.
No, he didn't.
Nick didn't seem too open to that at all.
Well,
I was.
So can I add that?
Tom, go ahead.
So if Nick's not open to it, do you think the select board is going to be open for it?
Oh.
But, and then
And what is that? How does that affect town meeting? I'm sorry.
Go, no, you go ahead. I
How
cut
does
you
that
off.
affect town meeting when the select board, no, warrant committee says yes? We haven't had like.
I don't.
I don't know.
And then town meeting,
I don't disagree with you.
So are you talking about the override?
No, I'm just saying like
Moving.
just moving money around, like what the warrant committee does, and like I'm saying,
Yeah, right.
I'm just black and white kind of. I'm approaching this, but like if Nick doesn't like it, select board doesn't like it, where does that put us?
I mean, I agree. It's
We're,
better
like,
if we all agree. It's going to sail through town meeting a lot easier if we all agree. That's why, the health insurance idea. Nick does not agree with it. I don't want to speak for him, but it seems he doesn't agree with it. But could he be persuadable? I just made a public, I'd shown him everything that I showed you privately. I just made the public case. Is that going to change anyone's opinion?
Yeah, fuel up, dude.
This is early.
And if hands go up on Zoom, please let us know right away.
If we said we really want this,
Yeah.
would, how hard would you fight us if we say we really want it?
You don't know until you ask.
Dave, Julia's hand.
Julia, please.
Yeah, I guess I still feel like there's kind of a fundamental lack of either understanding or agreement as to like what we as a committee are able to or empowered to do. Am I misunderstanding that?
So, no, I think you're right. Ultimately, all we do is make a recommendation to town meeting as to a dollar amount associated with a line item in the budget. If we're going to recommend something that's different from what the town, because it's Nick as the town administrator, as approved by the select board. If it's going to be different from what the town says, we're going to have to explain that in our comment, and then we're going to have to give a recommendation on some other line item to account for that difference. So something's going to have to come from somewhere. So general advice. Go ahead.
I feel like there's kind of a fork in the road here. Like if we are able to propose moving money around and we're gonna look, because we're not gonna take the ship and try to drive an override, we're instead gonna try to find 50,000 here, 50,000 there to meet who knows whose needs exactly. I mean, that's a huge body of work that if we're gonna try to do that in the next 2 weeks, I think, and this is what I think Jay's getting at, it feels like quite a large undertaking, but if we're just going to make recommendations sort of yes or no for what's in front of us, that's not nearly as much work. So that's where I think it would be really helpful to understand what we are empowered to do, what we're able to do, and maybe the appetite of the committee as a whole for if we are able to do that more nuanced swirling, finding 50 grand here and there, do we even have the appetite to do that as a committee in the next 2 weeks?
Right. So I think technically we theoretically could just say yes or no to an article, but that would be my sense is that would not serve a purpose, because if we say no, we disagree with this request for an appropriation, we just say no. So does that mean that we're recommending zero? We have to give a number to the town that they can use. And so my sense is that, like in the old days of John Cronin, right, who in many ways acted as the town administrator. The warrant committee would do this. But now in the days of the strong town administrator, like this, in the weeds work in the budget is done by them. So my sense is caution. You know, like we talk about being in our lanes. It's not necessarily a chain of command, but we all have our roles that we play and places and time and the time that we do it. Is that if we were going to make changes, I think which we can do. They should be very, very focused. And I hear Julia's caution, this tremendous body of work that we would take upon ourselves if we really got into the weeds of every little thing. So I'll throw that out there.
Judy's hand is up.
Judy.
Thanks, Dave. Just for clarification while we're all together, did I think I heard from your explanation of overrides that it is not really our duty to make that recommendation, that the recommendation really goes to the select board, which bounces through or by or the town administrator? Could you just take a minute to clarify that for me?
So the way an override is set up to work is basically this: is that the town administrator works with all the departments, comes up with a budget proposal. He's obliged to come up with a balanced budget. So that's what we call our, year-over-year level funding, usually. Then, all the departments come up with a needs-based, which is going to be requests additionally on top of, what the town can do as their year-over-year balanced budget. Now, the select board reviews, discusses with the town administrator and that budget, and they decide whether or not to go for an override. So then we're at a warrant committee, then we review all of this. Maybe we have feelings on it, but the bottom line is the only body who can put an override on the ballot, because an override is a Proposition 2.5 override, which requires a town-wide ballot where the townspeople approve it. The only people who can put that on the ballot is the select board. So we are completely powerless to do anything other than what, at this point, it would look something along the lines of, we would start by going to the select board, it'd probably be me, go to the select board and say, we, warrant committee, believe that the town is making a terrible, terrible, terrible mistake by not doing an override. We're going to ask you to reconsider. As a practical matter, we talked about it here, they have deliberated. They've had the budget, they've had the same kind of meetings that everybody's had. I would be going to them and asking them to look at the same stuff as they've already looked at before. What would I bring to the table that would be new that they hadn't considered before? Like it's their right to make the call. So the select board it looked like they voted unanimously not to recommend an override.
So we're out of the loop right now concerning the FY25 budget and getting the warrant to town meeting.
I missed it.
We're out of the loop on an override in the little time we have left to get the warrant to town meeting. So we shouldn't, in a way, I believe, even be discussing override. We might be using up precious minutes that could be used for other discussions?
Maybe we could talk about an underride.
I don't think, that would be funny. It would be new and different, Dave. New and different.
Thank you for that, Judy. I think that you have the support of the Warrant Committee on that sentiment.
All righty. In that regard, I'm going to say goodnight, everyone.
Well, hold on. Hold on.
Hold on, all right.
Me too.
Ron had his hand up and voted. You may just want to check in.
Ron, you had your hand up and it went down. Do you wish to say something? Ron Sia?
Yeah, I had a question about, what we can possibly really do, and I think you explained it is,
Thank you. Okay.
It's really advocating with the select board if we felt that was necessary.
Okay. So just, is there, do we want to get the sense of the room on whether or not the Warrant Committee might want to recommend Nick's budget as is? You want to talk about that? Not ready to do that?
No.
Not ready to do that. Okay.
Can I ask, so I threw out an idea earlier today that would increase the town's budget by $450,000. Maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's a bad idea. Maybe people need to sleep on it, and that's fine. And maybe we could take that money and put it entirely into stabilization. Maybe we could put it part into stabilization, part into use, split it between the schools and not schools in a certain way. I don't know what the committee feels on that, and I don't know how we're going to get to a decision.
Right.
Like, if people need to sleep on it, that's fine.
It's a good idea.
But how are we going to, at some point we need to go back to Nick and say, Nick, crunch the numbers again.
Nick said it was not an option.
Well, Nick didn't like it.
No,
No, he said it's not an option.
He said this isn't our job, and he said that they put it. But no, he said just so maybe I heard it wrong, but he said that they have made the decision, and that they already locked it in. From what I
got that message loud and clear as well.
I think
because I was trying to.
He said by the end of the month they have to lock it in. It's before town meeting.
So I'm like, I don't want to waste too much time on something.
So maybe you and me talk to Nick tomorrow.
Well, I don't know what the Warrant Committee wants. Maybe the Warrant Committee doesn't want to do this.
I think that you would.
I've talked to Nick about this a lot.
No, so what's he going to say?
Yes, you are.
I think, for me, clarification on that. Is it today, no, or is it we have to, the rates are getting locked in by X date? And is it, because I think it's the whole, it's like anything else, like they're presenting a budget, but in the same way, I think when we were talking in previous times, you could say, it's the recommendation of the committee to do this or this.
But Amy, are you able to answer that question?
I don't want to speak for Nick.
Yeah.
But we've had a lot of conversations. How do I say this?
Politely.
We have worked a lot on this issue with our insurance consultant. We have put forth a group insurance budget with a holiday and a 3% premium that we think is reasonable and fiscally responsible. And we are not in support of this.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Not to say you can't go back and ask him, but
And then I guess
we have considered it. We don't think it, and our insurance advisor
Well, these are the
also
people
did
that
not
do the
advise.
job. I mean, this is totally out of our realm.
Support of the first one.
Out of my realm.
And then I guess the other question is like the timing of it, because I asked, that was the question that I asked of Nick, because the thing he talked about locking in the rates, my question was, are you telling me it's already too late?
So I think you're talking about two things. Are you talking about the premium increase of 3%? Or are you talking about a second holiday? Because I think the answer's different depending upon what.
So I'm at the limit. What am I asking, Jay?
I'd like to hear the answer to both of those. I mean, I'm more
So
interested in
that one's-
holiday, but
That's more for Nick on the premium.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I believe at any time, we could choose, so say 6 months into the year, if we see our claims are not trending as the underwriters have said, we could consider a holiday at that time. That timing would not work for what you're trying to do. And I think I would just caution too is we've had a lot of discussions about, is it a wise idea to fund above level service with one-time money? Or is it, we will need to go to S&P and the bond rating agencies and justify what we've put forward as a balanced budget, which will be hard enough to do. It's one thing when you're preserving services. It's a little bit harder when you're adding it. But with that being said, we understand there's critical needs of the schools and the town. So
I guess, but last year, we used more one-time money to fund.
we had more one-time money last year.
True?
We don't have the ARPA to the degree
So
that we
that-
had it.
Okay, I didn't know that would matter either way. I mean, I think
So we
the
should
one-time
never
money you
use
use this
one-time
year
money.
is a problem for next year. So no matter how much you have, $2.5 million is worse than $1.5 million. And we added 7 positions or however many to the school. We added to the library. We added to DPW. So maybe it's a bad idea, but what we did last year was even more.
So we weren't supposed to really, to her point, and this is what we talked about last year, is like free cash is actually supposed to be for not positions. It's supposed to be for things like, you know, that we could get improvements from, you know. So we've been running this course for two years of free cash. Luckily, we had this amazing amount of money, and we had it in again this year. Otherwise, we would have been up a creek without a paddle.
And this is the sense that I'm getting from where the town's at on this issue, is that, you know, Amy and Nick are super nice. And they're not going to give us a hard no unless it's just not possible. Okay, and so they're going to give us like, we do not support, you know, you need to be careful, there's reasons for this. And they're going to say, like, you know, we will do everything we can to support you. But I think if to go with Jay's plan here, I think what would need to happen in order to actually go back to them in light of the strong caution that they're giving is we would have to have, I think, something close to a very powerful majority on the Warrant Committee that that's what we wanted to do, and it was our strongest sense that it was necessary for us to do it due to almost like an emergency situation, which some people may feel that we have. I don't know, right? But I think that if like the Warrant Committee was going to want to try that out, it would have to be like very, very important to us. And I think Jay's point about sleeping on it is a good idea, because a decision that's this important should not be made at this time of night after we've
Remember that when we
I also think for me, just like
we voted at midnight.
seeing, like I need to see everything from just the way my brain works, like everything in totality, like what is everybody asking for, and then you get a sense of, like we have a sense of the need of the schools. But are there other, you know, are there other things, you know, I don't know that it would be.
I think we just assume yes.
See the whole, right, but sort of to have a sense of the scope I think would make a difference.
Yeah, sure.
Of where my.
Sure. Ron. And then Tom.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Dave,
It's
just
Ron.
building on your,
there he is.
your thoughts that we would need like a very strong majority. I think we'd also need like really strong expertise to really back up our recommendations. I really I'm hesitant to take a different position from people who do these types of things for full time and they're paid for it. I mean, I think we could have advice, but I think absent some real good expertise that would counter what the people who are paid to do these things, I'd be hesitant to just go out with the majority. I think experts typically are paid for their expertise.
Thank you for that, Ron. Tom?
I don't have any comment or suggestion as to this topic. I just wanted to be recognized for secretarial concerns at the end of the meeting, when you're finished.
Yes, Tom. You shall so be recognized.
Thank you. So I just wanted to lay out, through you, Mr. Chair, just when we're meeting.
Right.
And if maybe we should pick an overflow evening, just in case we need one more night. And what would that be?
Okay.
I don't know, I'm sorry, I just want to raise this now because I can see at the end of the month like freaking out on Saturday night about comment writing. And I don't want to do that.
I think you should have a glass of wine and then do it.
Probably got to readjust your thinking.
Because it's the weekend.
For right now, definitely 18, 20. Okay, we're scheduled on 18 and 20 to have on those 2 nights everybody right now except for police and fire. Then I think we should put down 25, 26, 27. Like Jay was saying, like if the budget is, let's just say close to home, if the budget's close to what Nick's proposal is, I think that's plenty of time. It's possible we could not need 26, 20, 25, 26, 27. Overflow, let's just go.
The Thursday. Right, no one wants.
Let's just go 1, 2, 3.
Sure.
And
so the 28th. Oh, what do you mean?
But yeah, because I think
April. March. March.
Well, he said
1, 2, 3 of April.
Oh, that too. We're adding that.
Because let's just, as super backup, because I bet you what's going to happen is that in the past it's been something, I got to talk about the actual deadline, but in the past it's been something like, based on what's happened in the past, I would expect that they'd tell us that they want it on the 29th, which means it really goes in on the 1st. You see what I mean? If we needed to, that's like that's emergency. Like if we need that kind of time, it's like all gone straight to hell. And but we've been in situations that were much, much worse than this. So I'm not going to say like, it'll never happen, but our ability to handle an emergency based upon what we have in front of us, if we had to go into a Saturday, we could. You know, if we had to go to those Saturdays, but for purposes of right now, just say 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Or what do you think? Or we just, our emergency is the Saturday? And by the Saturday, I mean...
That's not.
Friday, okay. We made that mistake once.
Friday, yeah.
Once. Okay, apparently the most heinous sin one can commit in this town is to have a warrant committee meeting on a Friday. You have no idea. Saturday, you know, we could say the 30th if we had to.
But that's, I think that's a holiday weekend too.
Oh, it is? That's right.
28th, Mr. Chair. You could just go 4 days in a row.
All right, let's just write.
Good Friday.
It's his birthday.
Fine, 25, 26, 27, 28 as like just.
Yeah. Let the guy live.
Just last year,
A day?
on the 20th, you met and you took 15 votes. These are all warrant articles. The 21st, you did some big ones and you only did 6 votes. But then the 22nd, you blew through 25 votes, and that was with big issues. And then you had to go back and do a reconsider a month later.
Yeah.
Okay. I just,
So you did it in 3 nights, basically, last year.
We-
Bigger
Let's
warrant.
beat the record.
When we settle down and we figure out like what the hell we're doing,
Take our recommendation anyway.
you know, and then we make the big calls, then things just happen, right? Oh yeah, and then we're gonna need to get local historic district back in, and we've got stretch code.
Stretch code, we should just push it off another year.
We definitely have to have stretch code back. Okay, but all being said, yeah, Jay.
Oh, sorry. So we sort of got our subcommittees of one. What are we supposed to be doing?
In the subcommittee of one, talk to the department people, go over their budget. And the big things that I ask as the budget is the needs-based stuff. Like what are you not getting? What are you not getting that you want? And then you hear the lament. You know, I always think about, you know, Council on Aging when they were talking about how they were using like a decommissioned police cruiser as, you know, they were like, you know, the radio had been ripped out and the wires were all over, you know, because the police had this derelict vehicle in the back, and she was complaining that she needed a car. It's like, you want a car? I got one. You know, they're like the Blues Brothers out there. You know? And you're like, what? You know, you just hear these heartbreaking stories of, or like, DPW starts talking about this truck. They're like, yeah, they dragged this truck off the beach at Iwo Jima, and we've been using it every day since, boy, but we need a new one. And you just hear these stories, and you're like, I can't believe, the dedication that people show and how they get things done, right? And so then that's the big thing is I listen to the needs-based, right? And then you come in, and then, and then you write the comment. But for people who haven't written the comments before, a good place to start is on the, you go to the one from the year before, because so many of the comments are very basic. A lot of them are just change the numbers. Okay. Lori.
Yes.
And then Amy.
And who?
Amy Dexter had her hand up.
Oh,
I just want to say I can help with the comments.
Thank you. No, it's true. Thank you, Amy. No, it's true. And Amy and Nick do an awesome job of getting the warrant ready to go. And so when the draft is up and the numbers are there, you can feel good that they're right. And that you can use, a lot of times what you're doing when you're writing your comment is you're taking the numbers out of their tables, et cetera. And so you can feel comfortable that in the draft the numbers are right. Laura, did you want to?
Make a motion to adjourn?
Does anyone oppose?
No.
We are adjourned.
Do you have a second?
Tom seconded it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My mic was off.
You were pushing it the whole time.
Thank you.